The probe was 3 layers into the girl's skull when the reading refused to fall, and physician adept Tavan Al knew, in the cold place beneath her mantle, that something was wrong with the world. It was not supposed to hold. Every acquired mind held for a breath and then let go. That was the whole science of the Pale Ward, the single clean arc that Tavan had watched play out 400 times on this same cradle. Seat the lattice probe against the base of the specimen's brain, wake the deep structures 1 tear at a time, and watch the resistance drain out of them like heat out of a body. The line always fell. It fell for the reptile folk of Osh and the tall, soft ruminants of the Jew Combine, for the burrowers, for the singers, for every people the Oscari reach had ever gentled and shelved and forgotten. On the 3rd tier the mind gave up its shape and the reading dropped to the flat, quiet floor, and the specimen went still, and its world could be marked closed. Tavan's line was climbing. "Confirm the calibration," she said. Her throat lit pale amber as she spoke, the old reflex, light leaking through the skin under her jaw. The junior at the console was a tender named Ialu, barely out of his 2nd molt, his gray skin still soft enough to show the dark of his blood beneath it. He ran the calibration without a word. 2 of his 6 filaments trembled against the plate. He stilled them. "Calibration holds adept. The instrument is clean." Then the instrument is lying. She did not look away from the lattice above the cradle, where the mapped shape of the specimen's mind glowed in slow blue tears, and none of them were coming apart. Run the 3rd wake again, gently. The girl on the cradle did not move. That was the other wrong thing, and Tavan had been noticing it for the better part of a shift, the way you notice a sound that has been going on so long it becomes part of the silence. The specimen was awake. Her eyes were open. She had been awake since the 2nd tier, which was itself an impossibility the console had flagged twice, and Tavan had twice overridden, because the alternative was to admit the sedative load was correct, and the animal simply was not going under. She lay in the restraints with her small, blunt hands loose, her breathing even, watching the ceiling of the theater with an attention that Tavan had catalogued at the start of the shift, as the dumb stare of a thing too simple to be afraid. She was no longer sure that was what it was. "3rd wake," Ialu said, rising. On the lattice, the 4th tier began to brighten. It was not supposed to be there. The map only had 3 tiers. The 4th was drawn in a color the console did not have a name for, and it was coming up out of the deep of the girl's skull like something surfacing from under ice. Tavan leaned in. Under the theater's daylight the girl's face was very ordinary, a flat pale face, a scatter of small healed scars along one cheekbone, a fringe of cropped brown hair matted with the gel of the head cradle, dirt under the blunt nails, a body built low and dense and unlovely, the way all the umber specimens were built, everything about it saying *heavy world, hard world, do not envy this animal its home. There was nothing in the face to be afraid of. Tavan catalogued that too and filed it and did not believe it. Adept Ialu said, "The 4th tier. It's not a brain structure. It's not organic." "Say what you mean." "It's a device." His throat had gone dark. Young ones could not keep the light out of their skin when they were frightened, and he was frightened. "There is a device seated against the base of her skull. It has mass. It has an edge." The wake probe woke it. The theater's daylight came from the long dome overhead, the great filtered pour of the local star sliding across the reclamation station's flank. And in that clean, pale light, Tavan watched a structure that should not exist finish surfacing on her lattice, and felt the shift come loose beneath her the way a floor comes loose. "Pull the probe," she said. Ialu's filaments moved. The probe did not pull. He tried again. The controlled withdrawal that ended 400 procedures, the gentle backing out of the instrument from the specimen sleeping deep, and the lattice flared, all 4 tiers at once, the blue and the color with no name flushing bright, and the console under Ialu's hands lit with a cascade of alerts in the old warning red the Oscari had used since before they had left their drowned homeworld. It won't release, Ialu said. His voice climbed. Adept, the probe is coupled. Something has coupled to the probe. The girl spoke. She had not spoken in 11 days. The record said she had made no sound since intake beyond the animal noises of a body under stress, and Tavan had read that record and believed it. And now the specimen turned her flat pale face a few degrees on the cradle, toward the console, toward the frightened junior, and said, in the trade tongue, in a low, even human voice with the accent filed almost to nothing, "You should stop touching that." Ialu recoiled so hard his stool went over. He came up against the far wall of the theater with all 6 filaments splayed, his mantle hood flat to his skull, and the light was gone out of him entirely, his skin the dead gray of a thing playing dead. "It talks," he said. "Adept, it talks," the record said. The record said a great many things. Tavan had not moved. She was very old for a physician still cutting, old enough to have learned that the moment to be afraid was not the moment to show it, and she held herself over the cradle with her filaments folded and her throat dark, and looked down at the small, dense animal that had just given her an instruction. "You have language." "Yes." The girl's eyes came to her. They were a flat brown, unremarkable, and there was nothing in them of the panic that should have been there, nothing of the 11 days of the pale ward, the tears, the wakings, the long, slow theft of everything a mind was. There was only a kind of patience, worn very smooth. "I've had it the whole time. You people don't listen for it. You listen for screaming. Specimens do not require language for the procedure." "No," the girl agreed. "I don't suppose they do." On the lattice the 4th tier pulsed. Once. It was a slow, deliberate pulse, nothing like the flicker of a brain, and the console answered it with a new alert. One Tavan had never seen the instrument raise in 40 years of cutting, a flat black band across the readout with a single glyph in it that the machine had gone into its oldest archive to find. "Transmitting." "Ialu," Tavan's voice did not change. "That was training, that was 40 years. What is transmitting?" He was still against the wall. It took him a long moment to make his filaments obey, to crawl them back across the console, to read what it told him and to say it out loud. And when he did, his young voice had the flatness of a mind that has stopped being able to be surprised and has gone somewhere quieter and worse. "The device," he said, "the device in her skull. It woke up when the probe touched it, and it's adept. It's not receiving, it's sending. It's sending on a carrier the station's own array doesn't have a channel for. High, cold, straight up out of the dome and into the dark." He looked up and his eyes found Tavan's, and then past her found the small, calm human on the cradle. "It's a beacon," he said. "We woke a beacon. It's calling something." The girl on the cradle closed her eyes, not in fear. In something that looked, on a human face, almost like relief, like a body finally setting down a weight it had carried a long way. And when she spoke again, it was very quiet, almost to herself, in the low, even human voice, and Tavan would spend the rest of a long life turning the words over. "There it goes," the girl said. 11 years. I was starting to think it wouldn't wake." The theater door cycled. Hymender Cash Laro came through it the way he came through every door, first and full of himself, his broad mottled bulk filling the frame, his mantle hood raised in the display of authority that the old caste still used and the young ones had bred away. Behind him 2 ward wardens in the pale harness of station security, their weapon filaments coiled and ready, called up from 3 decks down because the theater's alarm had reached the overseer's office, and the overseer did not tolerate alarms in his ward. "Adept all." Cash's throat blazed the confident white of a mind that had never once doubted its place in the order of things. "You will explain to me why my instruments are screaming, and you will do it in the time it takes me to reach that cradle, or you will explain it to the assembly." "A device," Tavan said, "seated intracranially in the umber specimen. The wake probe activated it. It is transmitting." Cash reached the cradle. He looked down at the girl the way he looked at all of them, the way Tavan had looked at them until about 4 minutes ago, the flat proprietary glance of a man reviewing salvage. Transmitting what? To whom? Unknown on both counts. Then shut it off. The probe is coupled, it will not release, and the device does not appear to have an off. Tavan gestured at the black band on the readout, the single archived glyph, and watched the Hyminder read it and watched, with a cold clinical interest that surprised her, the exact moment the confidence in his throat guttered. It is broadcasting, Hyminder. It has been broadcasting for 6 minutes. Whatever it is calling has had 6 minutes to begin to hear it. Cash Lauro was not a stupid creature. Cruel and vain, and armored in the certainties of a civilization that had been gentling worlds since before the Oscari learned to leave their own, but not stupid. And Tavan watched him do the arithmetic that she had already done, watched him arrive at the thing that made the pale ward suddenly feel very small and very far from anywhere. The Umber quarantine is 900 years cold, he said. It came out slower than the rest. That world was catalogued feral, isolated, pre-void. There is nothing out there for a beacon to reach. There is no one for this animal to call. That was the catalog, Tavan said. This is the instrument. The girl opened her eyes again. She looked up at the two big soft creatures leaning over her cradle in the daylight, the overseer and the old surgeon, and there was no hatred in her face, which was somehow worse than hatred. There was only the flat, patient certainty of someone watching a mistake finish being made. You catalogued the wrong thing, Ren Sorrel said. You catalogued the planet. You should have catalogued the ones who go looking when their people don't come home. Cash Lauro straightened. The light in his throat had gone to the pale, uncertain flicker of an old animal in a bright room that has just realized it does not know what is in the room with it. Wardens, he said. Kill the device. Cut it out if you have to. I want that signal stopped. You can't stop it, the girl said without heat, the way a person tells you the tide. It's already out. It's been out for 6 minutes. It doesn't need me anymore, and it doesn't need the machine. All either of you did was tell it where I was. One of the wardens raised a weapon filament toward the cradle. No, Tavan heard herself say, and did not fully know why she said it, only that some old instinct beneath the science had come awake at the same moment as the thing in the girl's skull, and it was telling her, very clearly, that whatever else was true in the theater, the small, calm human on the cradle was the only thing in the room that understood what was happening, and you did not, when you were lost, put a weapon to the head of the only one who knew the way. The warden looked to Cash. Cash, staring at the black band on the readout at the single glyph transmitting, did not give the order. And 40 light-years out, in the cold, clean dark between the reclamation station and its dead quarantine star, on a carrier wave the Oscari reach did not have a channel for, in a language older than the trade tongue and older than the reach itself, something heard the beacon. And it began to turn. They took the beacon out of her. It should not have been possible to say it that plainly, but it was, and Tavan would remember the plainness of it, the way Cash Lauro's fear had translated straight into procedure the moment the alarm gave him something to do with his filaments. He had them move the girl to the deep theater, the one with the shielded walls, on the theory, his theory, said in the flat overseer's voice that did not invite argument, that a hull of woven attenuator mesh would blind the beacon, would cut it off from the dark it was calling into, would let his physicians reach in and pull the thing out of her skull before whatever was listening could fix a course. Tavan had told him the mesh would not matter. She had told him that the carrier the device used did not seem to obey the physics the mesh was woven against, that the console's oldest archive had raised a glyph it had not raised in living memory, that this was not a beacon of any make the reach had a countermeasure for. He had told her that she was a physician and not a signals adept, and that she would cut when she was told to cut. So she cut. The girl was awake for it. The sedative did not touch her. A second draw, a third, doses that would have stopped the heart of any acquired specimen on the ledger, and Ren's Sorrel lay in the deep theater's restraints with her eyes open and her breathing even, and let the old surgeon open the base of her skull, while the light in Tavan's throat would not steady no matter how she willed it. "You don't have to do this," the girl said, not a plea. There was no plea anywhere in her. It was said the way you tell a driver the bridge is out. "It won't help you. The thing's already sent. All you're doing now is hurting me for no reason, and that's going to matter later to the people coming. It's going to be a thing they count." "Be silent," Cash said from the observation tier. "They keep a very good count," the girl said, to Tavan, quietly, filaments width from the moving instruments. "That's the part your people never understood about mine. You looked at the planet and you saw animals that die easy and breed fast and don't leave the gravity well, and you thought that meant simple. You never once thought about what a species like that learns to be out here when it's the ones that did leave. When it's the ones who went out into all this." A small tilt of the pinned head, taking in the station, the dome, the dark beyond it, and found out how it treats the people who can't fight back yet. Tavan's filaments did not stop moving. 40 years had built that into her, the separation of the hands from everything else, and her hands lifted the woven device out of the seat it had made against the base of the girl's brain. A small, dark, irregular thing, no larger than a mender's eye, warm, faintly humming, and set it in the containment field the tender held up with both trembling manipulators. And the device went on transmitting from inside the field, the black band on every console in the deep theater never once flickering. Transmitting, transmitting, transmitting. "You see," the girl said and closed her eyes. "It doesn't need me. It never needed me. I was just where it slept." Cash Laro had the containment field carried to the signals deck and packed inside a null vault, the kind the Reach used to move things that thought. And when the black band did not so much as dim, he had the null vault put inside a second one. And when that failed too, he stopped giving orders about the vault and stood on the signals deck for a long time with his hood low, watching the station's great array try and fail to even locate the carrier the little device was screaming on. Tavan closed the girl's skull. It was fine work, the finest she had done in years, and she did it slowly, and she was aware the entire time that she was being watched by the flat brown patient eyes, and that the watching did not feel like the watching of a specimen. "Why aren't you afraid?" she said. It came out lower than she meant. She had not decided to ask it. Ren's Sorrel considered the ceiling of the deep theater. "I was at first," she said. "Intake's the worst part. You don't know anything yet. You don't know if anyone knows where you are. You don't know if the marker even works. That's the fear, not knowing if you're alone." A slow human breath. "Then about the 4th day I felt the seat of it against my skull go warm, just a little, just once, the way it does when it's checked in and gotten an acknowledgement back, and I knew the network still had me. After that, there's nothing to be afraid of. After that, it's just waiting and being polite and not giving you people any reason to break something you'd have to answer for." "The network," Tavan said. "You'd call it a fleet, I think, if you saw the small part of it that's coming, but it isn't really a fleet." The girl's flat gaze came around to her, and for the first time there was something in it that was almost kindness, which frightened Tavan more than any snarl the deep theater had ever heard. "It's more like a promise. A long time ago my people made each other a promise when we started going out into places like this and losing each other in them. The promise was, nobody stays lost, not one of us, however far, however long. If you carry the marker and the marker calls, we come. We always come." She said it without drama, the way you'd recite a thing so deep in you it had stopped being a belief and become a bone. "It's the oldest thing we have. It's older than the marker. The marker's just how we made it real out here." On the observation tier, Cash Laro had come back. He stood at the rail with his security detail, and he had heard the last of it, and his throat pulsed the hard white of a creature reasserting a world that had come loose. "It is a broken machine in the skull of a feral animal," he said, "transmitting into empty space. There is no fleet. There is no network. The Umber world is 900 years quarantined, and there is nothing out there but a dead star and cold rock. And by the next shift, my signals adepts will have this carrier characterized and jammed, and this specimen will go back on the cradle where it belongs, and the ward will resume. He looked at Tavin as if daring her to contradict him with instruments. Take the day's readings, file them. This is a curiosity, adept. It is not an event. Hi, Mender, said the signals adept. She had come up the lift while he spoke, a lean old Oscari of the technical caste, her filaments stained with the reagents of her trade, and she did not have the deference the ward staff had for the overseer. She had the flat affect of someone who worked with real things and had just been handed one she could not make behave. We have a return, she said. The deep theater went very quiet. Even the instruments seemed to hush. A return, Cash repeated. On the carrier, the one we can't channel. The signals adept looked at the readout in her manipulator, and then, because the number on it was not the kind of number you delivered to a readout, she looked up and said it to his face. The device transmitted for 11 minutes. 4 minutes ago it received an answer, a single pulse. Clean, directed. It came in on the exact carrier the device is using, which means whatever sent it is using the same physics we don't have, which means it is not a reflection and not an echo and not noise. She let that sit. And it was strong, High Mender. It was very strong. Whatever answered did not answer from the dead star. The bearing puts the source above the plane of the system entirely, coming down out of deep space, and by the strength of the return, she stopped and started again, because the trade tongue did not have a comfortable way to say it. By the strength of the return, it is already close. Days, not years. Days. Ren's sorrow on the cradle let out a breath that a human would have called a sigh, and it had ease in it, and it had grief in it, both at once. The sound of someone who has been holding a door shut for a long time and has just felt the person on the other side finally take the weight. That'll be the near picket, she said to no one to the ceiling. The ones who were closest when the call went out. There'll be more behind them. There's always more behind them. She turned her head, found Tavin's dark eyes among all the panicked, light-guttering faces on the tier and the theater floor, and held them. You've got maybe 3 days, she said. I'd think hard about what you want them to find when they get here. Because they're going to catalog you the way you cataloged my planet. And your file's already got 11 days of me on the cradle in it. That's the part I'd fix if I were you, while you still can. Cash Lauro ordered the deep theater sealed, and the girl held under continuous watch, and the signals adept confined to her deck. And he went to send a courier-type message to the assembly. And for the length of a shift, the reclamation station, Sarn Oveth, tried very hard to behave as though nothing had changed. It had changed. Tavin felt it in the corridors, the way the ward staff moved, the way the light guttered in throats that should have been steady. Word did not stay in the deep theater. It never did. By the second meal cycle, the whole station knew that a specimen off the umber shelf had called something out of the dark, and that the dark had answered, and the knowing sat on the station like weather. She went to see the girl in the small hours of the shift, when the corridors were dim with the station's night cycle daylight. The Reach ran even its dark hours bright, a habit from the drowned world where their ancestors had feared the deep water more than anything, and had made themselves a civilization that never turned off the light. The watch warden outside the sealed theater did not want to let her in. She was physician adept of the ward. He let her in. Ren Sorrow was sitting up. They had left her the restraints but freed her hands to eat, and there was a tray of the reconstituted protein mash the ward fed its long-term specimens, and she had eaten some of it methodically, the way a soldier eats, not because it is good, but because the body needs fuel and you do not know when the next chance comes. She looked up when Tavin cycled the door and she did not tense. "You're the one who cut me," she said. "Twice. You've got good hands. It barely hurt the second time and you weren't even trying to be kind. That's just skill, I noticed." Tavin stood inside the door. She was old, and she had cut 400 minds off the shelves of dead worlds, and she had never once had a specimen thank her for her hands, and she found she did not have anything ready to say. "I want to understand," she said finally. "Before it arrives, I want to understand what my ward has done." The girl set down the ration. "Sit down then," she said. "You're old and you're going to be standing up when they get here whether you want to or not. Rest while you can." Tavan said. "Tell me about the promise," Tavan said. "You want the whole thing or the part you need?" "I have never in my life been told the whole thing by a specimen. Tell me both." Something moved across the girl's flat face that a human would have called the ghost of a smile, there and gone. "Fair," she said. She folded her blunt hands in her lap, and when she spoke it had the shape of something told many times, in cold places, to keep the fear down. A thing recited around whatever humans built their fires around out here. "My people got out into the dark late," she said. "Later than yours, I'd guess, by the way you all move like you own it. We came out slow and stupid and small in ships that barely worked into a galaxy that already had you, the Reach, and a dozen others like the Reach. Old civilizations with catalogues and quarantines and words like acquired and asterisk, gentled asterisk, that had been dividing up the sky into things worth talking to, and things worth harvesting for a very long time before we ever showed up." She looked at Tavan steadily. "You know what happened to the first humans who went out. I bet the Reach has some of them on a shelf somewhere. Salvage, curiosities, feral animals off a quarantined rock that die easy and breed fast. Nobody came for them, they just stopped being. Somewhere out here, alone in a bright room like this one, wondering the whole time whether anyone even knew they were gone." Tavan said nothing. She was thinking of the ward's deep shelves. She was thinking of the 400. "So we made the promise," the girl went on. "Not a government. Governments come and go. We've had 100 of them. They don't hold. This was under all of that. The people who went out furthest, the ones who'd seen what happened when a human was alone in the dark and it went bad, they made each other a thing that wasn't a law and wasn't a treaty and couldn't be voted away. Nobody stays lost. If one of us falls into the dark, captured, wrecked, taken, sold, forgotten, the rest come. Not for revenge. That's what your people won't understand, and it's the thing that's going to save some of your lives in 3 days if you're smart. Not for revenge. To bring the person asterisk home. The coming home is the whole point. Everything else that happens is just what it costs to make the coming home happen. And the marker. The marker's how we made it real across the distances." She touched, unconsciously, the back of her own skull, where Tavan's fine work had closed over the empty seat. "You can't just promise. Promises die in the dark same as people, so we built a thing that doesn't. Everyone who goes out past the edge carries one. It sleeps. It's quiet. It's polite. It doesn't even announce itself. Most of the time you could scan a person for a year and never find it. It's built to hide from exactly the kind of catalog your ward keeps. It sleeps until something wakes it. And then it calls, on a road through the dark that the old civilizations never found because they stopped looking for new roads a long time ago, because they already owned all the ones they knew." Her flat eyes held Tavan's. "Your surgeon woke mine. That's all it took. One wrong touch in a bright room 40 light years out. And now it's calling and it's been heard, and the answer's already turned this way, and there is nothing that you or the High Mender or the whole Oscari Reach can do to unhear it. That road only runs one direction now. Home is coming to get me." "Home," Tavan repeated. The word did strange things in the trade tongue in her throat. "You call the thing that is coming asterisk home." "I call the people on it home. The thing's just how they travel." The girl leaned back against the cradle. "You keep wanting it to be a weapon. I can see it in you and the High Mender both. You keep reaching for it to be a fleet, an armada, a bigger gun than yours so you can tell yourselves you lost to a bigger gun and it wasn't really about you. It's not that. It was never that. It's just my people coming to take me back and being very good at it because they've had a long time and a lot of grief to get good." There was a long quiet in the sealed theater. The station's night daylight lay flat and pale on the woven walls. Somewhere far below, the signal's deck was still failing to jam a carrier it could not find. "Why you?" Tavin said. "Of all the ones on the shelves. Why did the marker choose to be in you?" For the first time, something in the girl's face changed all the way through, and Tavin saw under the smoothed-down patience how young she truly was. Not a specimen's age, a person's age, barely grown. "It didn't choose me," Ren Sorrel said. "We all carry it, everyone who goes out. My whole crew had them. We were a survey team. We mapped dead systems for the reclamation charts. Ironic, I know. We were charting the same kind of world your reach harvests." Her voice stayed level, but it cost her. Tavin could see it cost her. "There were 9 of us. When your salvage cutter took our ship, 7 were already dead. Your people don't take a survey ship gently. They hit it like it's going to fight back, and it wasn't. It was a survey ship. 9 of us, 7 dead in the taking. They pulled me and one other out of the wreck alive and put us on the shelf, and the other one," she stopped. She made herself go on flat and even. "The other one didn't have a marker anymore. It got hit in the taking. His didn't call. So nobody came for him, and 11 days on the cradle is 11 days on the cradle, and there's a floor to it. You know there's a floor to it. You built the cradle. His mind reached the floor about 6 days ago. I watched them mark his world closed off the wrong specimen. It was never his world. He was from a moon 2 systems over from mine. Your catalog didn't even get that right." "Tell me about them," Tavin said. She did not know why she asked it. 40 years, and she had never once asked a specimen about the crew a wreck had come with. "The 9, if you can." Ren was quiet a moment, and then she did flat and even the way she said everything, but Tavin could hear the cost run under it like the current under still water. She named them. She named all 9, the 7 dead in the taking and the one on the shelf and herself, and she said what each of them had been, not as a soldier lists casualties, but as a person says the names of people, which is a slower and a harder thing. There had been a pilot who could set a survey ship down on a rock in a gravity shear that the automatics refused, and would not be praised for it, and pretended every time that it had been easy. There had been a young cartographer on her first long tour who had cried, quietly, the first time she saw a dead world up close, and understood that it had once had weather. There had been an old hand 2 tour from retirement who kept a running argument going about whether the reclamation charts they drew would ever be used for anything but harvest, and had decided in the end that it did not matter, that you map the dark honestly and let others decide what to do with an honest map, and had died still believing the map was worth the making. 9 people, in a ship that barely worked, charting dead systems at the edge of the dark, carrying markers they hoped they would never need, a very long way from anyone who loved them. "That's who your cutter hit like it was going to fight back," Ren said when she had finished. "That's the feral animals off the quarantined rock, a pilot and a girl who cried over dead weather and an old man who believed in honest maps. Your catalog had a hazard grade for the planet we came from. It didn't have a single one of them in it." She looked at the old surgeon steadily. "You keep the wrong records, adept. That's the whole of what's wrong with the reach if you want it in one sentence. You keep beautiful, complete, 900-year records of everything, except the only thing that was ever real. You catalogued my world down to the mineral. You never once wrote down the pilot." Tavin All had been a physician of the Oscari reach for 40 years, and in all that time she had performed the work of the pale ward with the clean conscience of a woman doing a settled science on things that could not truly be said to be people. And she sat now in the flat pale night daylight of a sealed theater, and understood, all at once and far too late, that she had spent 40 years being wrong in a way that had a floor to it. And that the floor was coming up out of the dark at the speed of something that had made a promise. "My crew's markers all called," the girl said quietly. "The moment we were taken, 7 of them from dead crew, mine from the shelf, 7 and 1. That's 8 calls your reach never heard, on a carrier you don't have a channel for, going out for 11 days before your surgeon happened to touch mine and wake it loud enough that even you noticed. She looked at Tavin with something that was almost pity. You think you're 3 days from meeting the thing that answered my beacon. You're not. You're 3 days from meeting the thing that answered *8* beacons, that has spent 11 days doing the arithmetic on what happened to this crew, and that is coming here to close the account and take the survivor home. And I am the survivor. And they know exactly, to the day, how long you kept me on the cradle, because I told the marker. Every warm little acknowledgement, every check-in, that's not just a heartbeat, adept. That's me telling them what's happening to me, so they'd know before they arrived. She let that sit in the bright, quiet room. So when the High Mender asks himself in about 2 days whether he should have his warden standing ready to fight or standing down with their weapons on the deck, she said, you tell him from me, it won't be a fight. My people don't fight things like the Reach. That's not what 3 days out at that speed means. It means they've already decided how this ends and they're just closing the distance. The only thing left to decide is yours. It's whether, when they open that door, they find a man who kept a survey kid on a cradle for 11 days and was cutting on her when they arrived, or a man who stopped. Tavin sat in the pale light for a long time after that. Then she rose, and she did the thing she had not done for any specimen in 40 years, which was to incline her hood, the old courtesy her caste used for a colleague, and she cycled the door and went to find Cash Loro. Cash Loro did not stop. Tavin had known he would not, and she told him anyway, standing in the overseer's office while the station's night cycle brightened toward the false dawn. The Reach kept even out here, and she watched him take everything the girl had said and turn it, in the way of a certain kind of powerful creature, into a story with himself at the center, and no fault anywhere near his hood. A survey team, he said. You believe that? A mapping crew of feral primitives carrying beacons of a make no cataloging house in the Reach has ever logged, that call on a physics we cannot channel, and that summon a, what did the animal call it, a promise asterisk. His throat pulsed the derisive amber the old castes used on juniors. Adept, you have been 40 years in this ward, and you have let a talking specimen frighten you into carrying its threats to my office like a courier. This is a device. Devices are made by hands. Hands can be found and answered. If the Umber world has a hidden void capacity we failed to catalog 900 years ago, then that is a matter for the Assembly's fleet, not for an old physician's nerves. You have already sent to the Assembly, Tavin said. I saw the courier type go out. I have requested a picket, a precaution. He said the word the way a man says a word he does not believe he will need. By the time anything the animal imagines could reach this system, there will be Reach hulls between it and my station, and we will speak to whoever built her toy from behind them. From strength, the way the Reach has always spoken to the worlds it gentles. He turned back to his displays, the flat proprietary posture Tavin had watched him take 400 times. Return the specimen to the shelf schedule. The ward resumes at the shift, and adept, the light in his throat went hard and low. If you incline your hood to a piece of salvage in my ward again, I will have your cast standing reviewed. You cut. You do not counsel. She did not return the girl to the schedule. She logged an intracranial complication requiring observation, which was true in every particular, and she kept Ren Sorrel off the cradle, and she went down to the signals deck instead, because she was a physician and physicians, whatever else was true of them, believed the instruments. The signals adept, her name was Naron Voss, Tavin learned. 40 years in the same station, and she had never once needed the name of a technical caste woman until now, had not slept. She had built, out of the station's array, and a great deal of improvised patience, a way to at least see asterisk the carrier she could not touch, a crude derived reading that turned the unchannelable into a shape on a plate, and she showed it to Tavin without being asked, because Naron Voss had also stopped believing the overseer. The return's not a single pulse anymore, she said. It answered once 4 hours ago to confirm it heard. Since then it's gone quiet on the transmit, but it's getting louder on the asterisk approach, not because it's signaling, Because it's asterisk closer. She tapped the plate. Whatever's coming, it has a signature. A mass shadow, a gravitational wake, the disturbance a large thing makes coming fast through the medium. I can read that with instruments I do have. And the wake, adept. She stopped. And did the thing Tavin was learning the honest ones all did, the recalculation done twice because the number was obscene. I've tracked reach capital hulls making system approach. I know what a warship's wake looks like on this plate. This is not that. This is bigger than that. And it isn't slowing the way a thing slows when it means to make orbit and talk. It's holding speed like a thing that already knows where it's going to stop. How long? Tavin said. 2 days, perhaps a little less. Naron Voss looked up from the plate. The picket the High Mender requested is 3 days out at best. Adept, whatever this is, it will be here a full day before the Reach's hulls arrive to stand between it and us. We are going to meet it alone. Tavin went to the dome. The reclamation station kept an observation gallery high in its dorsal spine, a long curve of real transparency where the staff could look out at the local star and the dead quarantined world it had once been built to harvest. And Tavin stood there in the bright filtered daylight and looked out at the dark above the plane of the system, where Naron Voss's plate said the wake was rising, and saw nothing at all. Just the clean, cold field of stars. Just the dark the Reach had catalogued and quarantined and thought it owned. Somewhere in it, closing, was a thing that called itself, through a captured girl, home. The next day and a half, the station tried everything a frightened institution tries. Cash Loro had the array attempt contact, a hail on every channel the Reach possessed, in the trade tongue, and in the 11 diplomatic protocols the Assembly maintained for first meetings, broadcast wide into the dark toward the rising wake. Nothing answered. The wake came on. He had Naron Voss attempt to jam the carrier one more time, throwing the full output of the station's array against the unchannelable road the beacon had opened, and the array overheated, and 3 amplifier casts were burned handling it, and the black band on the deep theater console never so much as flickered. The wake came on. He had the 2 ward wardens' weapons stood up, and the station's own light defensive batteries. It was a reclamation station. It had never been meant to fight. Its guns were for clearing debris and deterring scavengers, brought to readiness, and the crews stood their watches in the bright corridors and did not meet each other's eyes. The wake came on. And on the evening of the second day, with the picket still a day out, the thing that was coming did the first thing that Tavin would truly call asterisk, the first thing that reached past the fear in her old body and touched something older than fear. It signaled the station, not on the beacon's carrier. On the station's own channels, the trade tongue, clean and correct, the Reach's own diplomatic first contact protocol used back at them flawlessly, which meant that in something under 2 days the thing rising out of the dark had listened to the station's frightened hailing, learned the protocol, and chosen to answer in it. The message was very short. Naron Voss put it on every display in the command tier, and Cash Laro stood before it with his hood low and his throat gone entirely dark, and Tavin, standing behind him, read it, and felt the floor of 40 years come all the way loose at last. The message said, "We have your count. 11 days, 1 survivor, 1 lost, 7 dead in the taking. We are coming for the survivor, have her ready and unharmed. Everything else is yours to decide, and we will read your decision in the state you leave her. We are 3 hours out." 3 hours. Naron Voss's plate had said a day. The wake had said a day. Whatever was coming had let them believe it was a day out, had held that lie the way a hunter holds still, and had then in a single message folded 20 hours of margin into nothing, because it wanted the station to understand, precisely, procedurally, without any possibility of misreading, that it had never been racing the Reach's picket at all. It had simply been deciding when to arrive. "That is not possible," Cash Loro said. His voice had lost the overseer's flatness. "The wake, the mass shadow." Naron, the plate said a *day. The plate said what it wanted us to read, Naron Voss said quietly. She had stopped being afraid of him too. It let us track it, it let us build a picture. And the picture was a lie it fed us through our own instruments, and we believed it because it came in on physics we do trust. She looked at the overseer with the flat, exhausted honesty of a technician at the end of her competence. Hi Mender, it has been reading us the entire way in. It knows our array. It knows our defenses. It knew we would try to jam it, and it let us burn our amplifier casts doing it. It has been, this whole time, being patient with us. The way you're patient with something you've already caught. In the sealed theater, when Tavan went to her, Ren Sorrel was standing. They had freed her of the restraints at last. There had seemed at the end no point, and she stood in the middle of the bright shielded room in the shapeless gray specimen shift, small and dense and ordinary, her cropped hair grown ragged over the healed seam at the base of her skull, and she was doing something with her hands that Tavan did not at first understand. Folding the shift's loose hem straight, smoothing it. Making herself, in the last hour, as presentable as a girl could make herself with nothing, so that the people who had crossed the dark for her would not find her disheveled and afraid. They told you 3 hours, she said without turning. I felt it. The marker's gone, but you don't stop feeling the shape of a thing after 11 years. She turned then, and her flat brown eyes found Tavan, and there was the ghost of the not-quite smile again. You cut it out of me, and it kept its promise anyway. I want you to understand that. That's the part your reach never had. It was never in the machine. The machine was just so we could keep the promise across the distance. The promise was always in us. They are 3 hours out, Tavan said, and then... And then, Ren Sorrel said, it depends entirely on what your High Mender does in the next 3 hours, and I don't think it's going to be the right thing. I've been watching him. He's the kind that would rather lose a station than admit he was wrong about a planet. She sat down on the edge of the cradle, calm, hands folded. But you might be a different kind, so I'll tell you what I told you before, and you can do with it what you want. When they open that door, stand still. Don't reach for anything. Don't raise your voice. Don't raise a hand. Don't put a weapon anywhere they can see it. They've come a very long way to do one gentle thing in the middle of a hard one. And the only way this turns bad is if someone in a bright room makes them choose. In the first hour, the station came apart at the seams without a single shot fired. It began, as these things do, with the ones who had somewhere else to be. The station kept a pair of short-range cutters on the ventral rack, the same cutters that took survey ships, that had taken Wrens, and in the first hour a mixed crew of ward staff and technical cast who had heard the 3-hour message and done the arithmetic, tried quietly to take one. Not to fight, to run, to be 40 light years in any direction when the thing arrived. Cash Loro's wardens caught them at the rack and held them there, and the standoff in the cutter bay went on the whole hour, weapons half raised on both sides, because the overseer would not permit the station to be seen to flee, and the crew would not permit themselves to be kept aboard a place that had woken something out of the dark. And Tavan, called down to talk them off it, understood watching them that the promise had already done half its work before it ever arrived. It had not needed to fire. It had only needed to be believed. A civilization that had spent 900 years certain of its place in the order of things was tearing at itself in a cutter bay, because a girl on a cradle had said they always come, asterisk, and enough of them had looked at the readings and believed her. Launch it and it doesn't matter, Ren had told Tavan when the surgeon went back up to the sealed theater between the cutter bay and the signals deck, moving through corridors gone strange with fear. The cutter, tell them not to bother. Wherever they run, the marker already told my people where I was, not where the cutter's going. My people aren't looking for the station. They're looking for me. A cutter full of your ward staff running the other way is just a cutter full of people who won't be here to stand down when it counts. Tell them to come back and put their hands on the deck. That's the only place on this station that's going to be safe in 2 hours, and it's not going to be safe because of where it is. It's going to be safe because of what's in the hands. Tavan told them. Some of them came back. Some did not and launched anyway, and Naron Voss tracked the little cutter burning hard for the system edge on her plate, a single frightened spark against the rising wake, and said nothing, because there was nothing to say. It did not matter. The wake came on. In the signals deck, the honest work went on. Naron Voss had given up trying to jam the carrier. The amplifier casts were burned, the array was scorched, and she had made her peace with the fact that some signals cannot be killed, and this was the truest of them. And she had turned the whole of her ruined instrument to the one thing left that a signals adept could do, which was to watch and measure, and tell the truth about what she saw. And what she saw in the first hour was the wake resolve from a smear into a shape, and the shape refused to make sense. "It's not decelerating," she told Tavin on the deck in the scorched half-dark of the burned array. "That's the thing I can't get past. A vessel that means to make orbit and recover something has to shed velocity, has to burn, has to fight its own momentum, has to spend energy I could see and measure and count down. This isn't doing that. It's holding speed like it has all the time it wants and none of the physics I know. And it's going to arrive at a velocity that should carry it straight through this system and out the other side. And it isn't going to, because it's going to stop, and I cannot tell you how, because there is no how. It's going to arrive going far too fast to stop, and then it's going to be stopped." She looked at the old surgeon with the flat, exhausted honesty of a technician at the edge of her science. "I've spent 40 years believing the instrument. The instrument is telling me a thing that can't be true. And the girl's been telling me the same thing for 3 days in plain words, and she was right about all of it. So I've stopped believing the instrument, adept, and started believing the girl. That's where I am in the first hour. That's where the whole signals deck is. We believe the specimen now." Cash Loro made his decision in the second hour, and it was the wrong one, and Tavin saw it coming the way you see a dropped instrument fall, too fast to catch, slow enough to grieve. He came to the sealed theater himself, with 4 wardens now instead of 2, and Tavin understood the moment she saw the number. 2 was a watch. 4 was a plan. He stood in the door of the bright shielded room and looked at the small girl sitting calm on the edge of the cradle, and the fear in him had finished doing what fear does to a certain kind of creature, which was to curdle into something that felt, from the inside, like resolve. "The message said *unharmed, he said. To Tavin, not to the girl. He still would not address Salvage directly. It said to have her ready and unharmed, and that whatever comes next will be read in the state we leave her. You brought me those words yourself, adept. Do you understand what they are?" "A promise," Tavin said. "And a warning." A * lever. His throat pulsed the hard, triumphant white of a mind that believes it has found the crack in an impossible problem. They want her intact. They have crossed the dark for her intact. Which means, adept, that for as long as she is in my hands and not theirs, and for as long as her being intact depends on my restraint, that thing out there cannot do to my station whatever it plans to do. It has to hold. It has to talk. It has to wait until the assembly's picket arrives and there are reach hulls in this system and we are dealing from strength again. He turned to the wardens. "Move her to the command spine, the observation gallery. I want her where the array can see the approach, and I want 2 weapons on her the entire time, and I want the whole of that thing out there to understand, from the moment it makes orbit, that the survivor's condition is a decision I make, and not one it makes." "Hyminder," Tavin said, very quietly, "you are about to put a weapon against the head of the one thing in this system that these people have crossed the dark to protect. You are about to make yourself the exact thing their promise exists to answer. I am going to make myself the only thing in this system they cannot ignore." "They will not ignore you," Tavin said. "That is precisely the problem." He did not hear her. Powerful, frightened creatures rarely do at the end. It is the tragedy the old physicians all learn and can never teach. He had the wardens take the girl. Ren Sorrel did not resist. She rose when they reached for her, and she let them bind her hands again, and she walked between them out of the sealed theater and up through the bright corridors toward the command spine with the flat, even step of someone conserving everything. And as she passed Tavin in the doorway, she said, without turning her head, in the low human voice pitched for the old surgeon alone, "He just made the choice for you. Remember that when it happens. Whatever you do in the next hour, remember he took it out of your hands first, and yours are the only clean ones left on this station. Keep them that way." They put her in the observation gallery, high in the dorsal spine, in the long curve of real transparency where Tavin had stood and seen nothing in the dark. They stood her at the rail with the dead quarantined world below and the empty star field above, and they put 2 wardens beside her with weapon filaments uncoiled and aimed. And Cash Laro stood behind them with the array's command feed at his manipulators, and the station waited for the thing to arrive so that it could show the thing its lever. The thing arrived. It did not arrive the way a ship arrives. Tavin had watched Reach Capital Hull's make system approach 100 times from this gallery, the long deceleration burn, the running lights, the slow, proud crawl into orbit that let a warship be seen and understood and feared. That was how the old civilizations traveled, to be witnessed. This was not that. The star field above the plane of the system simply occluded. A section of it vast went out not in a flash, not with any light at all, but the way a thing goes dark when something enormous and unlit passes between you and it. Naron Voss's voice came over the command feed, flat and stripped. Contact. Optical occlusion bearing high, and it is. A pause, the honest technician's pause, adept. I can't get a size. The occlusion doesn't have an edge I can resolve. It keeps not ending. Then it lit. Not running lights, not a warship's proud display. A single deep pulse ran across the underside of the dark shape above them, and Tavin, at the gallery rail behind the wardens and the girl, saw for one held instant the true scale of the thing that a captured survey kid had called asterisk home. A hull, if it was a hull, that stretched across a span of sky no reach vessel had ever filled, dark and unornamented and old. Its surface not the clean geometry of the assembly's fleet, but something worn and layered and deep. The way a thing looks when it has been out in the between places for longer than the HFY Reach had kept catalogues. It was not beautiful. It was not trying to be. It hung above the station like a fact. And across its dark flank in a light that was almost gentle, a marking resolved, not a name in any script the Reach owned, but a simple worn glyph repeated, the same shape over and over down the length of the impossible hull, and Naron Voss, who had spent her life reading things, said over the feed in a voice gone very small, "It's the same glyph. The one the console pulled from the deep archive. Transmitting. It's not a name. The whole ship is the beacon's other end. It's the thing that answers. That's all it's for. That's all it is." In the observation gallery, Ren Sorrel looked up at it, and the smooth-worn patience on her face broke, at last, all the way, into something a human wears only for people they had stopped letting themselves believe they would see again. And she did not smile, and she did not weep. She simply looked up at the vast dark shape filling the sky above the reclamation station with her bound hands loose at her sides, and said, so quietly that only Tavin, 3 paces back, heard it. "You came, you always come. I told them you'd come." "Weapons," Cash Loro said. His voice cracked across the gallery. The 2 wardens beside the girl tightened their aim, weapon filaments a hand's breadth from her cropped head, and Cash stepped to the rail where the array's command feed could carry his voice out on every channel toward the vast dark thing, and he raised his hood to its full authoritative height, and he spoke to the promise the way the HFY Reach had spoken to every world it had ever gentled, from a position it believed was strength. "Unknown vessel," his throat blazed white, "you have entered a quarantined system under the authority of the HFY Reach. The survey specimen you have come to recover is aboard this station, intact, and her continued intact condition is contingent entirely upon your compliance. You will hold your position. You will make no approach. You will surrender your intent to reach adjudication, and you will wait for the arrival of the Assembly's picket, at which point terms will be set. If you move against this station or attempt any recovery by force, the specimen's intact condition will not be guaranteed. He let it land. He believed it was landing. You have crossed a long way to keep her whole, vessel. Do not make me the reason you failed. For a moment, the vast dark thing said nothing. Then it answered on the station's own channels, in the clean, correct trade tongue it had learned in under 2 days, in a voice that was unmistakably a human voice, level, unhurried, carrying under it the flat procedural calm that Tavan had first heard from a girl on a cradle, and had learned in 3 days to be more afraid of than any snarl, and the voice did not argue, and did not threaten, and did not raise itself at all. "This is the recovery element," the voice said. "We have your transmission. We understand your position. Before we proceed, we want to be clear about one thing, for the record we keep, because you will want it read correctly later." A pause, unhurried, the pause of someone making sure a difficult thing is heard exactly. "You have just informed a recovery element that the condition of the survivor is now conditional on our behavior. You have made her a lever. We heard you make her a lever. We want you to understand that we heard it, and that we have written it down, and that of everything you have done in the last 11 days, the taking, the shelf, the cradle, the cutting, that is the single sentence that has changed how gently this ends." Cash Laro's throat guttered. "Stand your wardens down," the human voice said, still level, still unhurried. "Put every weapon on the deck. Step away from the survivor. You have 4 minutes. This is not a negotiation, and it is not a threat. It is the last easy thing we are going to offer you, and we are offering it because she asked us to on the way in through the marker before your surgeon cut it out of her skull. She asked us to give the ones who stopped a chance to have stopped." The pause again. "So we are asking once, who on that station is going to stop?" 4 minutes is a long time to watch a creature decide who he is. Cash Laro stood at the gallery rail with the vast dark shape filling the sky above him, and the whole weight of 900 years of the Oscari reach behind him, and Tavan watched him fail to be able to put it down. That was the thing about the old certainties. They were load-bearing. Take them away, and the whole creature came down. He could not stand his wardens down, because to stand them down was to admit that the animal on the cradle had been a person, and that the survey ship had been a survey ship, and that the shelf in the deep of his ward was 900 years of a mistake with a floor to it, and he would sooner lose the station than carry that. Ren Sorrel had said it exactly, 2 hours ago, in the flat voice of someone who had watched a great many powerful creatures fail the same test. He'd rather lose a station than admit he was wrong about a planet. "It is bluffing," Cash said. His throat had gone to the flickering amber of a mind talking itself across a gap. "It wants her intact. It will not fire on a station holding her at the rail. Physics does not care how large the hull is, adept. It cannot recover a survivor it has vaporized. As long as she stands here, that thing is held." He turned to the wardens. "Weapons stay up. Nobody moves. When the picket arrives, the assembly will." "The picket is 19 hours out," Naron Voss said over the feed. "Flat. Done. High Mender. 19 hours. That thing gave us 4 minutes. Do the arithmetic you keep asking the rest of us to do. Weapons asterisk stay up. 3 minutes." Tavan Al was old, and she had spent 40 years being wrong in a way that had a floor to it, and she had come, in 3 days, to understand that there is a difference between the mistakes you make, because you do not know, and the mistakes you go on making after you do. The first kind is the price of being a physician in a hard universe. The second kind is the thing you become. She looked at the small bound girl at the rail, standing calm under 2 weapons with the vast promise of her people hanging in the sky above her, and she found that the decision she had thought she would have to make had already been made, days ago, in a sealed theater, when a specimen thanked her for her hands. She walked to the nearest warden, the young one, Ialu's age, his skin still soft enough to show his fear, and she did not shout, and she did not lunge, because she had told the girl she would keep her hands clean, and she meant to. She simply put her old filament over his weapon filament, gently, the way she would guide a junior's hand on a first incision, and she pressed it down, toward the deck, and she said, loudly enough for the feed to carry it out to the dark. This warden is standing down. I am Physician Adept Tavan All, and I am ordering on my cast authority every hand in this gallery to the deck. Put them down. Whatever the High Mender is, he is not worth what comes if you don't. For one held instant nothing moved. Then the young warden let Tavan push his weapon down, and his weapon filament coiled and went to the deck. And beside him, the second warden looked at the vast dark shape in the sky, and at the old surgeon with her clean hands, and at the overseer whose throat had gone the color of an animal in a trap, and made the only arithmetic that mattered, and lowered his weapon too. And over the command feed, 3 decks down, Naron Voss's voice said, Signal's deck is standing down. And after her a battery chief's voice, rough and frightened, dorsal guns to safe, we are safed. And one by one, in the bright false daylight of a station that had never been built to fight, the hands of the Oscar Reach went to the deck. Cash Loro stood alone at the rail with the last weapon. He had taken it himself, pulled a warden's sidearm off the deck where the creature had set it, the flat proprietary snatch of a man who has run out of everyone to give orders to and will now do the thing himself. And he stood behind the small bound girl with the weapon filament pressed to the base of her skull, over the healed seam where Tavan's fine work had closed, and he faced the vast dark shape in the sky, and the light was gone out of his throat entirely. You will hold, he said, to the ship, to the promise. You will hold, or I finish what the ward started. She is not a lever anymore. She is a hostage, and I am a High Mender of the Oscar Reach, and I have gentled 40 worlds, and I will not be catalogued by a asterisk machine full of feral. Cash, Ren Sorrel said. She said his name. It was the first time she had used it, the first time in 3 days she had addressed the overseer directly at all, and it stopped him the way a hand on the chest stops a man, because a specimen does not use your name. She did not turn her head, the weapon was at her skull. She could not, but she spoke to the dark shape in the sky and to the old creature behind her both at once, in the low, even human voice, and it was, Tavan thought, the calmest voice she had heard in her long life. They're not going to hold, Ren said. I need you to understand that because I don't want you to die surprised, and you're about to. They didn't cross the dark to hold, and it was never the ship you had to worry about, Cash. The ship's just how they got here. Her flat brown eyes found Tavan past the overseer's bulk and held them steady. The ship can't fire on the station. You were right about that. That's good arithmetic. That's the one thing you got right in 11 days. A breath. So they didn't bring the ship down here to fire on you. They brought people. And the people have been aboard this station for about 90 seconds. The gallery lights changed. Not failed, changed. Dimmed to the deep red the reach used for a hull breach and then steadied, and over the command feed Naron Voss said, in a voice with no fear left in it because it had gone somewhere past fear into simple witness, multiple contacts, interior. They're asterisk inside. Adept, they didn't dock, there's no breach in the log, they came in the way that thing crosses the dark on the road we can't channel, they walked in on a physics we don't have. And then she stopped talking, because at the far end of the observation gallery, where a moment before there had been only a bulkhead of brushed reach steel in the bright false daylight, there were 4 humans. They did not look like the vast dark shape in the sky. That was the thing Tavan would carry longest. They were small as the girl, small and dense and unlovely and built for a heavy world, and they wore worn dark harness with no ornament and no rank she could read. And they carried themselves with the flat economical stillness of people who had done this exact thing many times in many bright rooms and had learned to keep the temperature low. They were not snarling. They were not screaming. There was no rage in them at all. There was something much worse than rage, which was patience, and grief worn down into procedure, and the total absence of any doubt about how the next 30 seconds would go. The foremost of them, A broad-shouldered woman with gray in her cropped hair and a long-heeled scar seaming one side of her jaw, looked down the length of the gallery at the small bound girl and the old creature holding a weapon to her skull. And she did not raise her voice, and she did not hurry. "Ren Sorrel," the woman said, "survey element ninefold. You've been out here 11 days. That's 11 days too long, and we're sorry it took the wake as long as it did to find you, and we're going to talk about all of it on the way home." Her flat gaze moved, unhurried, to Cash Lauro. "But first, there's the one still holding the weapon." Cash Lauro's finger tightened on the weapon filament, and three things happened in the space where a heartbeat should have gone. And Tavan, who had spent 40 years training her hands to move faster than her fear, did not see any of them clearly and understood all of them completely. The first thing was that Ren Sorrel dropped. She did not lunge or twist or fight. A bound girl cannot do those things, and she did not try. She simply let her knees go, all at once, the way a person lets go of a rope, and dropped straight down out of the line the weapon had been holding. And it was not panic and it was not desperation. It was a thing she had clearly been told to do and had been waiting 3 days to do, done cold, on account only she could hear. The weapon filament, tracking the base of her skull, followed her down a fraction of an instant too slow, because it had been braced for a fight and gotten a fact instead. The second thing was that the recovery lead crossed the gallery. Tavan did not see the crossing. She saw the woman at the far bulkhead, and then she saw the woman at the rail, and the distance between had simply been spent, without hurry exactly, the way a thing that has done this in many bright rooms spends distance. Economically, without a wasted motion, at a speed that the Oscari eye read as a smear, and the Oscari mind refused. There was no roar to it. That was the part the ward staff would talk about for the rest of their lives, the ones who lived long lives after. There was no snarl, no cry, no rage. There was a small, dense human in worn, dark harness closing 40 paces of bright daylit gallery in the time it took a high mender to correct a weapon by the width of a dropped girl, and doing it in total silence, with the flat, unbothered focus of someone finishing a sentence. The third thing was that it was over. The recovery lead had Cash Lauro's weapon filament in one blunt hand, bent up and away from the girl and toward the transparency, and she had the overseer himself folded down against the rail with an economy that had nothing of anger in it and everything of practice. One of his broad manipulators pinned, his hood forced flat, his great mottled bulk held immobile by a creature a third his mass. Not because she was stronger, Tavan understood, watching, but because she knew exactly where an Oscari body would and would not bend, had known it before she crossed the room, had spent some fraction of the last 2 days learning the anatomy of a species she had never met against the chance she would need it in a bright room 40 light-years from anywhere. They had studied the reach on the way in. They had studied everything. That was what patience was. The weapon did not fire. She had seen to that in the crossing in a way Tavan's eye had not caught. The filament hung dead in the woman's grip, its charge shunted or its channel crushed, made safe by a hand that had reached the right part of it first. "Down," the recovery lead said, to Cash, not loud. "You had 4 minutes and a hand on the deck and you picked this. That's on your record now, not ours. Stay down and it stays a record." Ren Sorrel got up off the deck. She did it without help, her hands still bound, unhurried, and she stood and looked at the woman with the gray hair and the scarred jaw holding the overseer against the rail. And something passed between the two humans that had no words in it, that Tavan, old and Oscari, and only 3 days into understanding these people at all, could nonetheless read, because grief and relief look the same across every species that has enough of a face to show them. Then Ren turned and held up her bound hands, and one of the other 3 recovery humans stepped in and parted the binding with a tool that made no sound, and the girl rubbed her wrists once, and that was all the ceremony she gave 11 days on the cradle. "You held on," the recovery lead said to her, still holding Cash down. Still not loud. "I told them you'd come," Ren said. Every day I told them. Her voice did not break. It had the flatness Tavan had first mistaken for the dumbness of a simple animal and now knew for the thing you become when you have decided you are going to be alive when help arrives, and have made yourself, day by day, into someone worth the crossing. 7 of the crew are dead. They took us hard. Call made it off the ship with me. He's on the shelf, 3 doors down from where I was. His marker got hit in the taking. It never called. Nobody was coming for him and he knew it, and it still took him 6 days to reach the floor. I watched them mark the wrong world closed off him. She said it evenly, and only Tavan, close, saw what it cost. He's still down there. I'm not leaving without him, even if there's nothing left in him to bring. We know about Call, the recovery lead said. His marker's dead, but yours told us he was with you. We don't leave a body on a shelf either. We'll get him. Her flat gaze came up off Cash and swept the gallery, the wardens with their weapons on the deck, the young one Tavan had guided down, the old surgeon with her clean hands, and settled at last on Tavan herself and held. You, the recovery lead said, you're the one who cut the marker out. The gallery went very still. 2 of the recovery humans had not moved since they arrived. They stood in the flat, economical stillness of people for whom stillness was a kind of readiness, and Tavan understood that whatever she said in the next moment would be written down in the count these people kept, and that the count had a floor to it, and that she had spent 40 years on the wrong side of it. I did, she said. She did not reach for anything. She kept her hands where they could be seen, the way the girl had told her days ago in a sealed room. Twice. I opened her skull under an overseer's order and I took the device out and it went on transmitting and I closed her skull again. I have cut 400 minds off the shelves of dead worlds in this ward. I did not know they were people. That is not an argument. It is only what is true. I know they were people now. The recovery lead looked at her for a long moment. She told the marker about you, the woman said. On the way in, before you cut it, every check-in's a report. You'll have gathered that by now. Most of what she sent us for 11 days was arithmetic. What they did, how long, who was still alive. Cold stuff, the stuff we needed to do this right. A pause. But she sent one thing about you that wasn't arithmetic. She said there was an old surgeon in the ward with good hands who was starting to understand what the ward was, and that if it came to it, we should watch which way that one moved before we decided anything about her. The flat gaze did not waver. You moved the right way. You put your hand on a weapon and pushed it to the deck, and you did it loud on the feed where it counts. So here's the count, Adept, since you know we keep one. You cut a marker out of a girl's skull and that goes in it and stays in it, and you will carry it the rest of your life, which is the correct thing to carry. And you moved the right way when moving the right way could have gotten you killed, and that goes in it too. Both true. We don't erase the first with the second. We just write down both and let you go on being the surgeon who did both. She inclined her head the barest fraction, but Tavan's cast knew that motion, had used it for colleagues for 900 years, and it landed like a blow that did not hurt. That's the mercy. It's the only kind we've got. It's not forgiveness. It's a full and accurate record and the chance to be the second thing you did instead of only the first. Most of the galaxy doesn't offer even that. We learned too, the hard way, out here, being the ones nobody came for. Take it. Tavan Al, 40 years a physician of the Oscar I reached, took it. She had nothing else left to hold. They went down to the shelf. The recovery lead took Ren and one of her people, and she asked Tavan to walk them, because Tavan knew the ward and because the woman did not say this, but Tavan understood it, because a physician who had done the wrong thing for 40 years should be made to walk through the whole length of what she had done, on her own filaments, in the bright light, with the people whose lost ones filled it. That was part of the record too. The mercy had teeth. The deep ward of Sarn Ovith ran 3 decks below the theaters, and it was the largest single space on the station. And it was, in the Reach's own quiet institutional way, beautiful, long galleries of cradles in tiered, ranks under soft daylight panels, each cradle holding its specimen in the gentle maintained stillness of a mind that had reached the floor and been kept catalogued, filed against the closing of a world. 400, the record said, on the human side of the ledger alone. The ward held more than humans. It held the tall, soft ruminant folk of the Jew Combine, and the burrowers and the reptile castes of Osh, and the singers whose world Tavin had watched marked closed a decade past species from 100 gentled worlds, each one a mind that had been reached and woken tier by tier until it let go of its shape. Each one filed as salvage, each one, Tavin now understood, walking the galleries beside a small silent human who kept the temperature of her grief very, very low. A asterisk person that someone somewhere had not come for. Ren's sorrow walked the length of it and did not speak for a long time. She looked at the ranks of the shelved dead of 100 species, and something moved behind her flat calm that Tavin could not read. And when she finally spoke, it was quiet and even, and it was not, Tavin realized, addressed to any of them. All of you, she said to the galleries, for 900 years, and nobody came. Ren, the recovery lead's voice was low. We came for you, that's the promise. That's what it is, and that's all it is. We can't carry 100 worlds dead out of a reach station tonight. It isn't ours to carry, and there's no ship large enough and no time before the picket, and if we tried, we'd get you killed doing it. You know that. You've run recoveries. You know exactly what the promise is and exactly what it isn't. I know, Ren said. I do know. She stopped at the end of a gallery before a cradle where a small, dense human form lay in the maintained stillness, a young man's body, quiet, the light in the cradle's readouts flat at the floor. Call. 3 doors down, she had said. She had been 3 doors from him the whole time and had listened through 11 days to a friend reach the floor because his marker had taken a piece of shrapnel and gone silent, and no promise had found him. She stood over him and put one blunt hand on the edge of the cradle and did not weep. I know it's not ours to carry, she said, but the record is, isn't it? That part we can carry. The recovery lead was quiet for a moment. That part we can carry, she agreed. And that in the end was the thing the promise did to the Oscari reach, not the vast dark shape in the sky, not the 4 silent humans who had walked in on a road the reach could not channel, not the cold precise unmaking of a high mender at a rail. It was smaller than any of those, and it was the thing the reach never recovered from. The recovery element took the ward's catalog, the whole of it. 900 years of the deep ledger, every specimen, every shelf, every world the Oscari had reached and woken and marked closed, copied out of the station's archive in a handful of minutes by people who had studied the reach's systems on the way in, and carried up out of the deep ward into the dark, not as a weapon, but as a list of the lost. Every species the reach had ever gentled, every world it had catalogued as feral and harvested quiet, named now, counted now, held now in the record of the one people in the galaxy who had made a promise that nobody stays lost, and who could not walk through a ward like this one and leave it uncounted. They'll know, Ren said, over Call's cradle, watching the recovery human close the readout down and begin the slow, careful work of preparing the body to be carried home. The Jew, the Osh, the singers, all of them. In a year, in 10 years, in whatever time it takes the record to reach the roads they travel, they'll know their people didn't just vanish off the edge of the sky. They'll know where they went. They'll know a shelf held them. And some of those peoples are going to make promises of their own once they know it can be done. Her flat brown eyes came up to Tavin, and there was no triumph in them, which was somehow the most human thing about her. That's what your reach actually lost tonight, Adept. Not a station, not an overseer, you lost the quiet. 900 years the shelves were quiet because the lost stay lost and the dead don't send word home. We just ended that, not with a fleet, with a list. Up in the observation gallery, they dealt with Cash Loro. They did not kill him. Tavin had expected them to. She had braced for it, walking back up out of the ward, had readied whatever an old surgeon readies for the sight of a colleague unmade. They did not. The recovery lead had him brought to the rail again, under the vast dark shape that still hung silent in the sky, and she stood before him with the flat, unhurried economy she brought to everything. And she told him, in the clean, correct trade tongue, exactly what was going to happen, and it was worse than being killed. And she knew it, and she did it anyway because the record had teeth. "We're not taking you," she said. "We thought about it. You made a survivor into a lever in front of a recovery element, and there are people on my ship who'd carry you off this station for that alone and think it was mercy, next to what your ward did to a young man 3 decks down who never got a chance to be a lever or anything else." Her flat gaze held the overseer's guttering, lightless throat. "But we're not the Reach's law. We don't gentle. We came for our own and we take our own and we leave. So here's what we're leaving you with. Your assembly's picket is 19 hours out, and when it arrives, it's going to find this station intact, its people alive, its guns safe on the deck, and a complete unaltered copy of everything that happened here waiting in the log. Every order you gave, every dose you had the ward push into a girl who wouldn't go under, every minute of 11 days, and the moment, on the feed in your own voice, where you told a recovery element that a survivor's life was now conditional on our behavior. You made her a lever on an open channel, High-Mender. You did it yourself, and your own people are going to read it. She let that land cold and complete. We're not going to be the ones who judge you. That's the thing you'll have the rest of your life to sit with. You didn't even get to lose to us. You lost to the record, and you wrote it yourself." They did not stay long. Recovery elements never did. Taven would learn that later, when she made it the work of her remaining years to learn everything about these people that could be learned. But she felt it even then, in the way the 4 humans held themselves. The readiness that never fully set down, the sense of a people who had learned across a long grief that the dark rewards nobody who lingers. They had come for 1 living survivor and 1 dead friend and a list of the lost, and they had them, and the station's usefulness to the promise was spent. But before they went, Rensaro came to find the old surgeon one more time. Taven was in the observation gallery at the rail, where she had watched a High-Mender lose a station to a record he wrote himself. She was looking up at the vast dark shape that still hung silent above Sarn Oveth, occluding a span of stars no Reach hull had ever filled, and she was trying, with the failing tools of a mind trained for 40 years to believe it understood the dark, to take its measure. She could not. Naron Voss's plate still could not resolve where the thing ended. It kept not ending. "You won't get its size off the instruments," Ren said, coming to the rail beside her. "Small and dense and ordinary and free in the clean daylight. We built it not to give one. Not to hide we're past hiding. At this range you either see us or you don't, and you do. It's that a size is a thing you can plan against, and we'd rather nobody ever felt like they could plan against the promise. So it doesn't have an edge you can find. That's on purpose. Everything about it is on purpose. It's the most on-purpose thing my people ever made." "What is it?" Taven said, quietly. "Truly, not a fleet, not an armada. You keep telling me what it isn't." Ren was quiet a moment, looking up at it with her, the girl and the surgeon at the rail under the shape that had crossed the dark. "It's the memory of everyone we lost before we made the promise," she said at last. "That's the truest way I can say it. When my people first came out here late and small and stupid in ships that barely worked, we lost each other constantly. Wrecked, taken, sold, shelved by peoples like your Reach in bright rooms like the one 3 decks down, and for a long time we just bore it, the way everyone bears it, the way the Jew bear it and the Osh bear it and the singers bore it, right up until tonight. You lose someone to the dark and the dark keeps them, and that's the cost of going out, and you tell yourself it's the price, and you file it and you go on." Her flat voice did not rise. "And then 1 generation of us decided it wasn't a price. Decided that a people who could cross the dark and could not be bothered to go back into it for their own were not actually a people, just a lot of animals that happened to share a shape. And they built the first marker and they made the first promise and they went back. For 1 wrecked crew the first time. Everyone told them it couldn't be done. The distances were too great, the dark too wide. Nobody would ever hear a call across that much nothing." She nodded up at the shape. "So they found a road nobody else had found. under the dark your reach thought it owned, because they had a reason to look for one that your reach never had. That's the whole secret, Adept. It's not that we're stronger. We're not. You saw the ones who came aboard, small, soft, easy to kill, off a heavy world that made us dense and grim and nothing else. It's that we had a reason to go looking in the dark for a way to keep a promise, and nobody else did, because nobody else had decided the lost were worth crossing the dark for. We found the road because we needed it. You never needed it, so you never found it. And now it's ours, and the dark you thought you owned has a road through it that only answers to a promise, and there is nothing you can do about that at all. Tavin looked at the shape a long time. You went out late, she said. You told me, late and small and stupid, and yet you have been out here, she gestured at the impossible dark hull, longer than that. The road is older than a people who went out late could have built. The record my ward keeps has your world catalogued 900 years quarantined, feral, pre-void, and I no longer believe a word of my ward's records, but I would still like to understand. How long have your people truly been in the dark? Ren's not quite smile touched her mouth, there and gone. Longer than your catalog, she said. That's all I'll tell you, and it's all you need, and it's the thing I most want your assembly to sit with when they read the record. You catalogued a planet. You measured the gravity well and the atmosphere and the hazard grade, and you wrote feral, isolated, pre-void, quarantine 9 centuries cold. And you filed us, and you slept easy on it for 900 years, and you harvested us for the shelf whenever a survey crew wandered too far, because a filed thing is a safe thing. She turned from the shape and looked at the old surgeon directly, and her flat brown eyes held something vast and quiet and almost kind. You never once catalogued the part that mattered. You looked at the planet. You should have looked at the promise. The planet is a hazard grade. The promise is a road through your dark that you can't find, a ship you can't measure, a list of 900 years of your dead that's already leaving this system, and 4 small tired people who crossed all of that to carry 1 survey kid home, and who'd do it again tomorrow for the next one, however far, however long, because that's the thing we decided to be, back when we were losing each other in the dark and got tired of bearing it. She stepped back from the rail. You had us on a shelf for 11 days, Adept. You should be very grateful it was only a shelf, and that the promise came in cold, and that a girl on a cradle spent her whole 11 days asking the people who love her to give the ones who stopped a chance to have stopped. Because that's the only reason your station is still here, not because we couldn't, because she asked. Tavin all inclined her hood, the deep incline this time, the one her caste kept for the dead, and for the very great, the one she had not given a living creature in 40 years. I will not forget it, she said. I will spend what is left of me making certain the Reach does not forget it either. Then it wasn't for nothing, Ren said. Any of it. Call and the 7 and the 11 days. If one ward surgeon on one station spends the rest of her life making sure her people looked at the right thing, then it wasn't for nothing. She glanced up one last time at the shape that was her home coming to carry her out of the dark. That's the other half of the promise, the half nobody sees. It's not just that we come. It's that we make sure the coming asterisk means asterisk something after. Otherwise it's just grief with a ship attached. She did not say goodbye. Her people did not seem to, Tavin noticed. There was a nod, a hand briefly to the old surgeon's manipulator, a small human contact that carried more than any of the Reach's ceremonies. And then Ren Sorrel turned and walked the length of the bright gallery to where the recovery lead waited with the others, and with the quiet form of call borne carefully between them, and with the list of 900 years of the lost. And then, on the road the Reach could not channel, in the bright false daylight of a station that had been built to harvest the dark, they simply were not there anymore. Tavin all stood at the rail and watched the vast dark shape above Sarn Ovith hold its silence for one more moment. Then it lit once along its underside. Not a threat, not a display, something almost like a hand raised in leaving, and it turned without hurry, the way a thing turns when it has already decided where it is going to stop, and it went back up into the dark it had come out of, and the stars it had been occluding came back one by one, and the sky over the reclamation station was empty again, exactly as the catalog had always said it was. The catalog had never been so wrong about anything. The assembly's picket arrived 19 hours later, exactly on the schedule the overseer had staked a station on, and found nothing to save and nothing to fight. 3 Reach hulls came in the proud old way, decelerating on long bright burns with their running lights ablaze, and their weapon casts stood to. Ready, Tavan watched them make orbit from the same gallery rail, and she thought they looked, after the shape that had hung there the day before, like children's toys arranged very carefully on a shelf. The lead hull was a proper capital vessel of the fleet cast, and it disgorged, with all the ceremony the Reach loved, a boarding party under a fleet captain named Ozreth Vihal. And Ozreth Vihal came aboard Sarn Ovith expecting to take command of a crisis, and found instead a station full of quiet, exhausted people who had already had theirs, and could not stop looking at the empty sky. "Report," the fleet captain said on the command tier, his throat blazing the arrogant gold of the fleet cast, his hood high. He was young for his rank and certain of it, and he had come 19 hours at combat burn braced to be the hand of the assembly against an unknown intruder, and being denied the intruder had made him, in the way of a certain kind of officer, irritable rather than relieved. Where is the intruding vessel? Where is High Mender Lauro? Where is the specimen that started this? "The vessel has gone," Naron Voss said. She had been awake the better part of 3 days, and she no longer had the strength to be careful with a fleet captain, and Tavan watched her decide not to try. "It left 18 hours ago, on a road our array cannot see and your fleet cannot follow, and if it wished to be followed it would not have left. The specimen has gone with it. The specimen was not a specimen. She was a person, off a survey crew your reclamation cutters took 9 days before intake, and the people who came for her have gone home, and taken their dead, and taken the ward's entire catalog and left. You allowed an unknown power to loot a Reach archive." "We allowed nothing," Naron said. "We were not asked. That is the entire point, fleet captain, and if you have the sense the assembly pays your caste for, you will stop giving orders long enough to understand it. They did not need our permission for anything they did aboard this station. They took what they came for and they left what they chose to leave, and what they chose to leave is the only thing that matters now, and it is waiting for you in the command log, and I would advise you to read it before you compose the message to the assembly, because you are going to want to have read it first." Fleet Captain Ozreth Vihal read it. Tavan made herself stay in the room while he did, because she had promised a girl she would spend the rest of her life making certain the Reach looked at the right thing, and this was where that began, with a young, arrogant officer of the fleet caste standing before the command log, while the full record of 11 days played out in front of his caste's high hood. The taking of the survey ship hit hard because the cutter crews always hit hard. The intake, the shelf, the cradle and the readings that would not fall, and an old surgeon overriding the console twice because the alternative was to believe, the device surfacing, the beacon, the answer out of the dark, the vast dark shape that Naron's plate could not measure. And then, in Cash Lauro's own voice, on the open channel, in the clean, correct trade tongue for anyone in the galaxy to hear, her continued intact condition is contingent entirely upon your compliance. A high mender of the Oscari Reach, making a survivor into a lever, on the record forever. And then the reply in a level human voice, "We heard you make her a lever. We have written it down." Ozreth Vihal's throat went from gold to the flickering, uncertain amber of a young creature watching a world he had been sure of come apart in front of his caste. He turned from the log. "This is not to leave this station," he said. "The specimen, the asterisk individual, is recovered by a hostile power. The archive is compromised. A high mender has conducted himself in a manner that... This is an assembly matter, sealed, adjudicated internally. It does not go out on open channels where every combine and border power in the Reach can. It has already gone out, Tavin said. It was the first thing she had said, and the fleet captain looked at her as though a piece of the ward's furniture had spoken. You will explain that, physician. They copied the catalog, Tavin said. The whole of the deep ward's ledger, 900 years, every specimen, every world, every mind the Reach reached and woke and marked closed. They did not take it to hold it, fleet captain. A thing you hold can be bargained for. They took it to send it out along the same road they travel to the peoples whose dead fill our shelves. The Jew, the Osh, the singers, the burrowers. 100 gentled worlds that filed their lost as vanished and bore it, the way everyone bears it, because the lost stay lost and the dead send no word home. She held the young officer's guttering gaze with the flat calm she had learned from a girl on a cradle. That is no longer true. As of last night, it is no longer true anywhere the road runs. Every people the Reach ever harvested is going to receive, in whatever time it takes, a complete and accurate account of exactly where their lost went and who took them, and what was done to them on a station called Sarn Oveth. You cannot seal that. It is not in your log to seal. It left this system 18 hours ago on a ship you cannot measure, and it is already gone. The command tier was very quiet. And there is a message, Naron Voss added. For the assembly. They left it in the array, addressed, time to release when the picket made orbit. It has been waiting for you, fleet captain. I think you had better let it play. Ozreth Vihal, who had come 19 hours to be the hand of the Reach, and had found instead that the Reach's hand had already been read and counted and set gently aside, let it play. It was the human voice again, the recovery lead, Tavin thought, though it might have been any of them. They all had the same flat, unhurried calm. The temperature kept low even now, and it filled the bright command tier of the Assembly's capital hull with something none of the fleet cast had ever heard the Dark say back to them. To the governing assembly of the Oscari Reach, the message said, this is a recovery element of a people you have catalogued. You know the world. You have it filed, feral, isolated, quarantined 9 centuries. We are the part your catalog never had. We are not a fleet. We are not an empire. We do not want your worlds, your shelves, your Reach, or your Dark. We came into your space for one reason, and we have completed it, and we are leaving, and we will not come again unless you make us. Understand that clearly, because it is the only part of this that is a warning. We come when one of ours calls. Only then. If no marker of ours ever wakes in your space again, you will never see us again, and you may go on being exactly what you have always been, and we will not lift a hand to stop you. We are not your judgment. We do not want to be. We have watched what happens to a people who appoints itself the judgment of the Dark, and we are watching it aboard the station this message will reach you from. But you kept one of ours on a shelf for 11 days, and you woke her mind tier by tier to see how far it would fall, and when we came for her, a high mender of your Reach put a weapon to her skull and told us her life was now a thing he owned. And so there is one thing we are not going to leave you the comfort of. We have taken your ledger. 900 years of it. Every people you gentled, every world you marked closed, every mind you filed as salvage, named, counted, and already traveling home to the ones who lost them. You told yourselves the shelves were quiet because the lost stay lost. They do not stay lost anymore. Not here, not anywhere the road runs. We found that road a long time ago for our own, and tonight we have let 100 grieving peoples borrow it. What they build with it is theirs to decide. Some of them, we think, are going to decide to come looking, the way we did, once they know it can be done. You are not being conquered. You are being told the truth about the Dark. It was never yours. It only felt like yours because no one you harvested had a promise loud enough to answer across it. That changed on a station called Sarn Oveth at the touch of a surgeon's probe, and it is not going to change back. Return what you can. Send word where you can't. It will not earn you forgiveness. That is not a thing on offer, from us or from the peoples whose dead you shelved. but it is the difference between the civilization that harvested the dark and the one that stopped. We would not have bothered to tell you the difference exists if we did not think, having read your whole record, that a few of you might choose it. One of yours already has. Her name is in the log. Start there. We have our survivor, we have our dead, we have the count. This channel is closing, do not answer it. There is no longer anyone on this end to hear you. The message ended, and the bright command tier of the Assembly's Capitol hull held a silence that Tavan all would remember as the truest sound the Oscar I Reach ever made. The silence of a civilization hearing. For the first time in 900 years, the dark it had catalogued speak back, and finding that it had a promise in it, and a road, and a count, and no interest at all in the Reach's permission. Fleet Captain Ozreth Vihal stood before the dead channel for a long time. One of yours already has, he said at last, quietly reading it back off the log. He turned. His arrogance had not vanished. Tavan would learn that arrogance rarely vanishes. It only learns where it can no longer stand, but it had moved, gone looking for a place to put itself, and found for the moment none. It means the surgeon, you, he looked at Tavan. It is speaking of you in a message to the governing assembly as the one of us who chose. I know what it means, Tavan said. I was there when she decided I was worth the sentence. I intend to earn it, Fleet Captain, which is more than I can say for the last 40 years of my life, and I would suggest, respectfully, from an old physician to a young officer who still has the whole of his ahead of him, that you consider very carefully, before you compose your report, which of the two civilizations in that message you would like the assembly to find you standing in. Ozreth Vihal did not answer her, but he did not order the record sealed again, either, and Tavan counted that, in the way she had learned to count things now, as the first hand said on the deck. They found Cash Laro in the deep ward. He had gone down there in the 19 hours, alone, past the standing down and the surrender and the empty sky, down through the theaters to the long-tiered galleries of the shelved dead of 100 worlds. And Tavan, who went to find him because someone had to and because she would not send a junior, found him standing in the middle of it, in the soft daylight, among the cradles, with his hood low and his throat entirely dark. He was not doing anything. He was only standing there, in the ward he had run for 30 years, looking at the 400 human forms and the tall ruminants and the burrowers and the reptilecasts and the singers, as though he had never once seen them before, as though the walking through that the recovery lead had made Tavan do had happened to him too, in the dark, alone, with no one to make him. They left me alive, he said without turning. His overseer's voice was gone. What was under it was very old. I thought they would kill me. I would have killed me in their place. I made her a lever. He said it flatly, the way you say a thing you have finally stopped being able to not hear. On the channel, in my own voice. I made a person into a lever because I would rather have lost the station than been wrong about the planet. And she, the specimen, the girl, the asterisk person. She spent her 11 days on my cradle asking them to give me a chance to have stopped. He turned then, and Tavan saw that a thing had broken in him that would not mend, and that he knew it would not mend, and that this was the mercy the humans had meant. Why? Why would she do that? I put a weapon to her skull. Because that is what the promise is, Tavan said. I asked her the same thing more or less, and she gave me the same answer she gave you, though you were too busy holding a station to hear it. It was never about you, Cash. It was never about revenge or forgiveness or what you deserved. It was about the coming home meaning something after. She would not let her rescue be the thing that turned her people into us, so she asked them to leave a door open for the ones who stopped, not because we earned it, because she would not spend her freedom becoming what took it. Tavan looked at the ranks of the shelved, the long soft-lit galleries of everyone the Reach had filed and borne no consequence for, and felt the whole weight of 40 years settle where it belonged. The door is open, High Mender. That is the terrible thing she did to you. She left it open. Now you have to live knowing you could have walked through it and put a weapon to her skull instead, and that the difference between you and me is nothing, but which way we each moved in the last 4 minutes. I moved, you did not, and she'd have taken either of us. That's the promise. It doesn't ask what you deserve, it asks which way you move. The assembly did what large, frightened institutions do, which was to argue about it for a long time and change slowly, and pretend the change had been its own idea. The fleet cast wanted to pursue. Of course they did. It was what they were for, and a power that could not measure a hull and could not follow a ship and could not seal a record was a power the fleet cast did not have a language for. And so, for a season, the assembly's halls were loud with plans to characterize the road, to build an array that could channel the carrier, to be ready when the promise came again. Tavin read the transcripts as they filtered down to Sarn Oveth, and she thought of a girl at a rail saying we'd rather nobody ever felt like they could plan against the promise, and she understood that the fleet cast would spend a generation and a great deal of the Reach's treasure learning what the humans had built the whole thing to teach them, which was that there was nothing to plan against. The road only answered a promise. You could not build a promise in a shipyard. You could only become the kind of people who kept one, and the fleet cast had no idea how to begin, and would not, Tavin suspected, ever learn. The fleet cast did try once to characterize the road. Tavin heard about it the way she heard about everything now, in the filtered reports that reached a physician of a station that had become, against all its history, a place the assembly could not stop looking at. They fitted out a scout, the finest hull the Reach could build, crewed by the best of the signals cast, sent to sit at the edge of the system where the wake had risen and wait for the next time a marker woke anywhere in the Reach, and to be there, instruments open when the promise came, and to finally measure the thing that could not be measured. It waited a long time. And one day a marker did wake, 3 sectors distant, some other survey crew fallen into some other bright room, and the wake rose, and the scout burned hard to intercept the bearing and put its perfect instruments on the road at last, and the road was not there. There was no bearing to intercept. The wake the scout had tracked had been, like the one over Sarn Oveth, a shape the promise let them see because it chose to, and while the finest hull the Reach could build burned toward a phantom, the recovery it was hunting had already come and gone 3 sectors away, taken its own out of a shelf, and left. The scout returned having measured nothing. It had not even been ignored. It had been permitted to chase a wake, permitted to burn its fuel, permitted to learn, at the cost of a great deal of the Reach's pride, the one lesson the humans had built the whole thing to teach, that there was nothing to measure because the road was not a place. It was a promise, and you could not put instruments on a promise. You could only become one or fail to. The wiser heads understood sooner. There were always a few. They read the message the way Tavin read it, not as a threat to be met but as a fact to be lived with, and they turned, quietly, to the only question the message had actually left open, which was the one about the 2 civilizations. Return what you can. Send word where you can't. It will not earn you forgiveness, but it is the difference. A handful of the assembly's oldest members, the ones close enough to their own endings to have stopped needing to be right, began to ask what it would cost the Reach to become the civilization that stopped, and found, as everyone always finds, that the cost was mostly pride, and that pride was the one thing the Reach had spent 900 years unable to put on the deck. Cash Laro they stripped of his caste standing and his ward and his rank, and they did it not out of justice but out of the oldest institutional instinct there is, which is to find a single throat to darken so the rest may go on shining. Tavin testified. She did not soften anything. She told the assembly exactly what the ward had been, for 900 years, under 100 overseers of whom Cash Laro was only the one unlucky enough to be holding it when the promise came, and she watched the assembly receive her testimony and use precisely the part of it that let them blame a man, and discard the part that indicted the ward, and she understood that this too was what large frightened institutions did, and she did not stop testifying. She had promised a girl. You said the true thing whether or not the room used it correctly. That was the whole of it. Cash was sent in the end to answer to the record, the human record, the one that had already left, propagating out along the road to the peoples whose dead he had kept. It was not a sentence the assembly imposed. It was simply the shape of the rest of his life, to be the named high mender in a document that 100 grieving civilizations were reading, the throat on the channel, the one who made a survivor into a lever. He lived a long time. Tavan heard, years later, that he had asked to be allowed to work in the returns, to be one of the ones who carried the shelved dead home, and that the request had been denied, because the peoples receiving their dead did not want his hands anywhere near them, and that he had accepted the denial without protest, because he had finally learned the one thing his rank had cost him the ability to learn, which was the difference between a thing you are owed and a thing you may be permitted to do. Tavan did not forgive him. Forgiveness was not on offer from her or from anyone. The girl had been right about that, but she understood him at the end, which was worse, and she carried that too. The record reached the Osh first. They were nearest, along the road, and they were a hard old people who had lost more to the Reach's cutters than they had ever let themselves count, and when the count arrived, named, dated, complete, 900 years of their vanished suddenly given a place and a cause, the Osh did not send a fleet either. Tavan had half expected them to. Instead they sent a delegation and a demand, and the demand was the thing that told her the humans had understood their own galaxy better than the Reach ever had. The Osh did not demand vengeance, or territory, or the Reach's ships. They demanded their dead. Every Osh mind on every shelf, identified from the stolen ledger, returned to the world it came from, with a full accounting of what had been done. And behind the demand, unspoken but plain in the way the delegation carried itself, was the thing the message had promised would come. Some of them are going to decide to come looking. The Osh had read that a promise could be built, and the Osh were going to build one. So were the Jew. So in time were the singers, whose world Tavan had watched marked closed a decade past, and who turned out not to be as closed as the catalog said, because a catalog that measures a planet and not a promise is always wrong about the thing that matters. One by one, along the road the humans had opened and then lent to everyone, the gentled peoples of the Reach's long harvest learned that their lost had a place, and demanded them back, and began slowly, and differently each time in the shape of their own griefs, to build the thing humanity had built first, a way to go back into the dark for their own. The Reach's dark stopped being the Reach's dark, not in a battle, in a decade of deliveries. And Tavan all spent the rest of her life in the returns. She petitioned for it when the assembly finally, grudgingly, under the weight of 100 demanding peoples, established the office, the ward of returns, they called it, with the bureaucratic instinct to make a soft word for a hard thing, and Tavan did not care what they called it. She had good hands and 40 years in the deep ward and a debt with a floor to it, and she went down among the cradles she had once tended for the harvest and began to tend them for the going home instead. She could not wake them. That was the grief she carried into every shift and never set down. The minds had reached the floor, the tears had come apart. There was no restoring what the wake probes had unmade across 900 years, and the humans, for all the vastness of the promise, could not have restored it either. The dead stayed dead. That was the cost the ward had made permanent, and no road and no ship could carry it back. But the bodies could go home. The names could go home. The account of what happened could go home, in an old surgeon's careful hand, so that no world stayed wrongly marked closed, so that no people bore their loss in the dark not knowing, so that the thing the shelves had done to the quiet could not be done again in silence. She learned every people's rights that came through her ward. She learned how the Osh laid their dead, and how the Jews sang theirs down, and how the singers, who had almost no dead left living to remember the rights, were taught them again out of the very records the Reach had kept to harvest them. The one used the ledger had ever been put to that Tavan did not have to be ashamed of. She grew old in the work, older than a physician of her caste usually grew, and the light in her throat, which had once leaked amber whenever she spoke, steadied at last into something even, because she had stopped, somewhere in the returns, being afraid. The humans came back once, only once in all the years, and not as a recovery. It was a long time after, long enough that Tavan had grown old in the returns, long enough that the ward of returns had become a real thing with real standing, and a caste of its own drawn from every part of the reach that had wanted, in the years of deliveries, to be the civilization that stopped. There were human dead still on the shelves. That was the thing that had brought them in the end. Tavan's ward had spent years identifying and repatriating the harvest of 100 worlds, and it had returned the Osh and the Jew and the singers and the burrowers, world by world, name by name. But there were human dead the Reach could not send home, because the Reach did not have the human world's locations, because the one road that ran to them was not a road the Reach could travel, because the humans had built it that way on purpose. And so Tavan had done the only thing left to her. She had sent word, out along the delivery routes, hand to hand, people to people, a message from an old surgeon in the ward of returns to whoever someday might carry it far enough. We have your dead. We cannot bring them to you. Come when you can and take them home. The ward is open. There will be no cutters. You have my word, and I am the one who cut the marker out of the girl, and I have spent the rest of my life making certain that meant something. It took years to reach them. The road was wide and the dark was patient. But one day, in the soft daylight of the ward of returns, a marker woke, not from a captive. There had been no captives in Tavan's ward for a very long time, but a marker one of the recovery people carried, announcing itself politely, the way they did when they came in peace and wanted to be met and not feared, and Naron Voss, gray now and half retired and still the only signals adept in the Reach who could read the carrier, sent word up through the station. They're here. They came. They're at the ward doors, and they're asking for the surgeon by name. Tavan went to the doors. There were 6 of them this time, in the same worn dark harness, with the same flat economical stillness, and at their head, gray now herself at the temples, a long life's worth of the dark written into her small, dense, ordinary face, stood Ren Sorrel. She was not young anymore. That was the first thing, and it landed harder than Tavan had braced for. The years had been the years. There were lines in the flat face and a stiffness in the way she stood, and Tavan understood, looking at her, that a human life is short by the measure of the Reach, that this woman had lived most of what she was going to live in the time it had taken an old surgeon to grow merely older, and that Ren Sorrel had spent that whole short life the way she had spent 11 days on a cradle, going out into the dark for her own, again and again, however far, however long. Because that was the thing she had decided to be. You came back, Tavan said. You sent word, Ren said. We have your dead, the ward is open. There will be no cutters. Her voice had aged too, roughened, but it had the same flat, even calm, the temperature kept low, that Tavan had first mistaken for the dumbness of an animal a lifetime ago. You have no idea what that message did when it finally reached us. An old Oscarized surgeon from the station where they shelved a survey crew, spending her years sending our dead home and asking us to come get the ones she couldn't reach. The ghost of the not quite smile, deeper now, worn in. There were people who didn't believe it, who thought it was a lure, put a promise on the road, wait for a recovery element to come in trusting and take them. That's what the old Reach would have done. She looked at Tavan steadily. I told them it wasn't. I told them I knew the surgeon who sent it. I told them she cut the marker out of my skull with good hands and then put her own hand on a warden's weapon and pushed it to the deck when it could have gotten her killed, and that whatever else was true about the Reach, that one moved the right way and kept moving it for a whole life, where it counted. She stepped forward into the soft daylight of the ward and looked down the long-tiered galleries, smaller now, so much smaller, most of the shelves empty, the harvest of 900 years nearly all gone home. So we came, to take our dead, and to see with our own eyes the thing you built out of the worst night of your life, and it's real. You made it real, Adept. A whole ward of going home out of a ward of harvest. She stopped, and for once the flat calm was not quite enough, and Tavin watched a lifetime of grief and a lifetime of the dark move behind the aging human face. My crew's been home a long time. Call's been home a long time. His people laid him down under a moon 2 systems from mine, and got his world right on the marker, which your catalog never did. I go and sit with him sometimes when a recovery brings me near. I tell him it meant something. And now I've got one more thing to tell him. That the surgeon who closed my skull spent her whole life making sure it did. They spent 3 days in the ward, and Tavin worked beside them the whole time, and it was the finest work of her long life, finer than the 400 cuttings, finer than anything her caste had ever given her a courtesy for. The recovery people moved through the last of the human shelves the way they did everything, without hurry and without waste, and they identified their dead, some by the ledger Tavin had spent years correcting, some by the silent broken markers still seated in the skulls where the wake probes had woken and unmade them, each dead marker a person who had called into the dark and reached the floor before any promise found them. There were not many left. The years of returns had emptied most of the galleries, but the ones that remained were the hardest, because they were the ones no catalog and no correction had ever managed to name. The truly lost, the ones taken so early and filed so wrong that even the human's own long memory had a gap where they should have been. We knew there were gaps, Ren said on the second day, standing over a cradle that held a small, dense human form the ledger could not place. The promise is old, but it isn't perfect. There are people we lost so far back before the markers, before the road was good, we know a number is missing. We've always known. We just never knew where. She looked down the long ward at the shelves, at the whole architecture of the harvest. And here some of them are. Here they've been for centuries. On a shelf in a bright room in a system we'd never have thought to look, filed under a planet's hazard grade instead of a person's name. Her flat voice held, but it cost her. It always cost her. Tavin had learned, and she paid it anyway every time, which was the thing about these people that the Reach had never once catalogued. Do you understand what you gave us, Adept, when you sent that message? You didn't just open a ward. You closed a gap in the promise that we thought was never going to close. There are families, old families, families that have carried a missing name for centuries the way mine will carry Call, who are going to get an answer they'd stopped letting themselves want. Because an Oscarized surgeon on a harvest station spent her life sending word into the dark. Tavin could not answer that for a while. She was old, and she had done a great deal of wrong in her life, and she had never learned a way to receive being told she had done a thing that mattered. And she did the only thing she knew, which was to bend her old hands to the work, to help lift a centuries-dead human child out of a cradle 100 physicians before her had tended for the harvest, and to carry it herself to the people who had crossed the dark to take it home. On the 3rd day, before they left, she asked. She had not meant to. She had promised herself across the years that she would never presume on these people, never ask them to show her more of themselves than they chose, because she of all creatures had no standing to be curious about them. But she was old and near the end of her own road, and she found she could not let the last of them leave without asking the thing that had sat in her since the night the sky went dark above Sarn Oveth. How far, she said. The promise, the road. You told me once at a rail that you would only tell me longer than your catalog asterisk and that it was all I needed, and you were right, it was. But I am old now, and I have spent my life in the returns, and I would like, if you can tell me, if it is a thing you are permitted to say, to understand how far it truly runs. How much of the dark has a promise in it now? Ren's sorrow was quiet for a long moment, in the soft daylight of the emptied ward. I can't give you a number, she said. Not because it's forbidden, because we don't have one. That's the truth, Adept, and it's a stranger and a bigger thing than any number I could give you. She looked up, though there was only the ward ceiling above them, and beyond it the dorsal spine, and beyond that the sky and the dark. When we started, we knew where every one of us was. A few crews, a handful of markers. You could hold the whole promise in your head. Now she shook her head, the small human gesture Tavan had come to read as a kind of all worn smooth by long acquaintance. Now the road runs to places the people who built it never went. It runs to the Osh, because they built onto it. It runs to the Jew and the singers and 40 other peoples who took what we lent them and made it their own and joined it to ours. Because a road that only one people can travel is just a longer kind of alone, and we'd had enough of alone. The promise isn't ours anymore. It stopped being only ours a long time ago, right around here actually, right around the night your surgeon woke my marker, and we let 100 grieving peoples borrow the road to bring their dead home. Her flat gaze came back to Tavan, and there was something vast in it, something that had stopped being human-sized and become the size of the thing 100 peoples had built together in the dark. So how far does it run now? I don't know. Nobody knows. It runs as far as there are people willing to go back for their own, and there turn out to be a great many more of those than anyone believed, back when the dark belonged to the ones who harvested it. That's the real answer. That's the thing I most want you to have at the end. You asked how far the promise runs. It runs as far as anyone's willing to keep it, and it's still getting wider, every year, in every direction. And no one owns it, and no one can plan against it, and nothing in the dark can put it back the way it was. She let that stand in the quiet ward. You started that here, she said. Not me, not the recovery element. You, adept with a probe in a bright room on the worst night of your life, you touched the wrong thing and something answered, and instead of running from the answer, you spent the rest of your life becoming it. There are peoples on this road now who go back into the dark for their own because an Oscarized surgeon showed them a harvest could become a homecoming. That's your marker. That's the thing you sent into the dark that's never coming back and never going quiet. Not a beacon in a skull. A whole civilization, changed, still spreading, still bringing people home in your name whether they know the name or not. The ghost of the not-quite smile one last time, worn all the way through to something Tavan had no word for in the trade tongue or any other. You wanted to understand what your ward had done. I've had a whole life to watch it. It's the best thing I ever saw come out of the dark. And I've seen the promise cross it 1,000 times. They carried the last of the human dead out of the ward of returns on the 3rd evening. In the soft daylight the reach had never learned to turn off, and Tavan walked them to the doors. It was a small procession by the measure of anything the reach did, 6 small dense people in worn dark harness, and the quiet forms they bore between them, and one old Oscarized surgeon with her hood low in the deep incline she had once reserved for the dead and the very great and now gave freely, because she had learned in the returns that those were the same thing. There was no ceremony. These people did not seem to need it. The carrying was the ceremony, the going home was the rite, and everything else was just what it cost. But at the doors, Naron Voss was waiting, gray and stooped and unwilling to have missed it. And behind her, quietly, without being ordered, a good part of the ward of returns had gathered Oscari of a dozen castes who had spent their years learning to bring the dead home, come to see the people who had taught them how, without ever meaning to, on a night that had changed everything. Ren Sorrel stopped in the doorway. She looked back once, down the long emptied galleries where 400 human minds and the harvest of 100 worlds had lain filed as salvage, and where now there was only soft daylight and empty cradles and the long slow work of a civilization that had chosen, too late but not too late to matter, to become the thing that stopped. It's almost empty, she said. The ward, in a life you emptied it. There are others, Tavan said. There were always others. 100 stations like this one across the reach. I could not reach them all. You reached this one and you sent word to the rest and some of them opened and the peoples came the way we came. Ren's flat gaze held hers. You don't have to empty every ward, adept. You only have to be the one who proves it can be done. After that it belongs to everyone. That's how a promise works. That's the whole secret of it. You go back for one, and the one becomes the proof, and the proof becomes the road. She did not say goodbye. Her people never did. But she reached out one last time and put her small blunt hand, scarred now, aged now, a whole life of the dark written into it, against the old surgeon's manipulator, the human contact that carried more than any of the Reach's words, and she held it a moment. And then she stepped back into the ranks of the recovery element, among the dead they had crossed the dark to carry home. And then, on the road the Reach still could not channel, and had finally stopped trying to, in the bright false daylight of the ward's doors, they simply were not there anymore. But this time, Tavin went up to the gallery to watch. She was old and the climb was long, and Naron Voss came with her because neither of them would have missed it, and they stood together at the long curve of real transparency high in the dorsal spine, the surgeon and the signals adept, two old Oscari at the end of their roads, and they looked up at the dark above Sarn Oveth. For a long moment there was nothing, just the clean, cold field of stars, the dark the Reach had once catalogued and quarantined and thought it owned. Then a section of it occluded. The vast dark shape rose over the station one more time, or a shape like it. Tavin understood by now that there was not one ship but many, that the Promise had 100 hulls now and would have 1,000, that what she was seeing was not a vessel but a fact wearing the shape of one, and it hung there silent, unmeasured, its underside worn and layered and deep, and along its flank the worn repeated glyph that was not a name but a purpose, the same shape the ward's oldest archive had gone looking for on the night everything changed. Transmitting. The thing that answers. That is all it is for, that is all it is. It lit once along its underside, not a threat, not a display. Something almost like a hand raised in leaving, given now to an old surgeon at a rail who had spent her life earning it. And then it turned, without hurry, the way a thing turns when it has already decided where it is going to stop, and it carried its dead up into the dark, and the stars it had occluded came back one by one, and the sky over the reclamation station was empty again, exactly as the catalogue had always said it was. "They'll go home," Naron Voss said quietly beside her. "All of them. Even the ones dead 500 years, even the ones no one living remembers. They'll go home." "Yes," Tavin said. "I spent 40 years jamming carriers," Naron said. "I was good at it. It was the whole of my caste and the whole of my pride, finding the signal and killing it before it could reach anyone. And the one signal that ever truly mattered I couldn't touch. None of us could. It went out on a road we never found because we never needed to find it, and it reached the one thing in the whole dark that was listening for it, and there was nothing I could do but watch." She was quiet a moment. "I used to think that was the worst night of my life, the night I met a signal I couldn't kill." She looked up at the empty sky where the Promise had been. "I don't think that anymore. I think it was the only night my whole caste was ever any use. We heard it. That's all we had to do. We heard it and we didn't kill it, and we told the truth about what it was. That turned out to be the only thing worth being good at." Tavin did not answer. She was looking at the empty sky and thinking of a girl on a cradle who would not go under, who had lain in the restraints with her eyes open and her breathing even, and told a frightened junior, before anyone understood anything, "You should stop touching that." Tavin Al lived 4 more years after the last of the human dead went home, which was a long time for a physician of her caste, and she spent all of it in the ward of returns. The tender Ialu came back to her. That was one of the small mercies of the long years, and Tavin did not deserve it and took it anyway. The young one who had knocked his stool over and gone dead gray against the theater wall on the night the beacon woke, who had said, in a voice with nothing left in it, "It's a beacon, we woke a beacon, it's calling something," had left the ward within the season, unable to walk its galleries anymore, and Tavin had thought him lost to the returns before they began. But he came back, years on, molted hard and grown into himself, and he stood in the doorway of the ward of returns and told her he had spent the interval unable to sleep in a bright room, and that he had finally understood that the only way to sleep again was to spend his hands emptying the shelves instead of filling them. He became one of the first of her caste of homecoming, and one of the best, because the ones who cannot forget the worst night make the most careful hands afterward. Tavan watched him grow old in the work she had grown old in, and she counted him, in the arithmetic she kept now, as the second thing the beacon had ever called out of the dark, the first being the promise, and the second being a frightened junior who chose, in the end, which way to move. She trained her successors carefully. That became the work at the end, more than the cutting hands could manage, the passing on of the thing she had learned too late, to Oscari young enough that they would never have to learn it too late themselves. She taught them the rights of 40 peoples. She taught them to correct the ledger, to read a broken marker, to lift a centuries-dead child out of a cradle with hands that remembered it was a person. But mostly, she taught them the one thing that was not a technique, the thing she had gotten from a girl on a cradle and spent a life understanding, and she said it to every new intake of the ward of returns on their first day, in the soft daylight, among the emptying shelves. We were the ones who catalogued the dark, she told them. For 900 years we measured worlds and we filed them and we harvested the ones we judged too simple to be people, and we slept easy on it, because a filed thing is a safe thing, and we were very good at filing. We measured everything. Gravity, atmosphere, hazard, grade, the whole cold arithmetic of a planet. She would look at them, the young ones, in the ward that had once been the harvest and was now the homecoming. And we were wrong about all of it, because we measured the wrong thing. We catalogued the planet. We should have catalogued the ones who go looking when their people don't come home. That is the only measurement that ever mattered in the whole of the dark, and it is not a thing you can take off an instrument. You can only learn it the way we learned it, by touching the wrong thing in a bright room and having something answer and choosing what you do next. She would let it stand. That is the whole of this ward. That is the whole of what we are for now. We are the ones who chose what we did next. Do not ever let anyone tell you it came too late to matter. Nothing that brings one person home comes too late. That is the arithmetic. It is the only arithmetic. Everything else we had wrong. She died in the ward, in the end, in the soft daylight, among the last few cradles still waiting for a people to come and take their own. Naron Voss was with her, gray and stooped and stubborn to the last, and the ward of return she had built went on without her, as she had made certain it would, because a thing that depends on one keeper is just a longer kind of a loan, and Tavan all had learned, from the people who crossed the dark for their own, that you build the thing to outlast the keeper, or you have not really built it at all. The Oscari reach was never again what it had been. That is the plain truth, and it is the thing the histories struggle with, because the histories want a war to point to, a battle, a fleet, a day the reach fell and there was none. There was only a probe in a bright room on an ordinary shift, and a reading that would not fall, and a beacon that woke at the wrong touch, and something that answered out of the dark. And then a decade of deliveries, and 100 peoples learning that the lost could be brought home, and a road that got wider every year in every direction and answered to no one but a promise. The reach did not fall. It was simply, quietly, permanently outgrown, by the very peoples it had spent 900 years judging too simple to matter, who had turned out to be carrying, all along, under the hazard grades and the quarantine marks, the one thing the reach had never thought to look for and could never learn to build. They still tell it on the road. That is the strangest part, the part Tavan did not live to see but would have understood. Among the 100 peoples who go back into the dark now for their own, on the road humanity found and lent and never took back, they tell the story of the surgeon and the girl, the physician of a harvesting people who touched the wrong thing, and instead of running from the answer, spent the rest of her life becoming it. They tell it to the young ones on their first recoveries in the cold places to keep the fear down. They tell it as the proof of the thing the whole road is built on, which is not that the promise is strong, or that the ship cannot be measured, or that the dark has a road in it now. It is a smaller thing than any of those, and it is the thing that made all of them. It is that the girl, on the cradle, through 11 days that had a floor to them, spent every warm little acknowledgement she sent into the dark, asking the people who loved her to leave a door open for the ones who stopped. And that one of them did stop. And that the one who stopped spent a whole life proving the door had been worth leaving open. There is no arithmetic in the dark colder or truer than that, and there is no instrument that will ever read it, and the peoples who go looking for their own carry it with them like a bone, the way the ones who made the first promise carried it, long ago, when they were late and small and stupid, and had just gotten tired of losing each other in the dark. Nobody stays lost, not one, however far, however long. They came for her, they always come. And the dark that once belonged to the ones who catalogued it belongs now to the ones who go back into it. Quietly, without hurry, on a road no one can measure or plan against or put back the way it was, carrying their own out of every cold shelf and wrecked hull and bright forgotten room the old powers ever filed and slept easy on. They were told once that it could not be done, that the distances were too great and the dark too wide, and no call could ever be heard across so much nothing. Something heard, it turned this way, it came. And it has never once stopped coming since.